These companies support the Thom Hartmann Program. They are HelloFresh, the #1 meal kit delivery service. More info at hellofresh.com, code TOM. CB Distillery, CBD for sleep and pain relief. More info is available at cbdistillery.com, code TOM. Ground News, a well-rounded perspective for newsreaders. More info at ground.news/Tom. Angie, for any project on your to-do list. More info at angie.com. Dinovite, a whole food supplement for your pet's immune system. More info at dinovite.com. And ExpressVPN, the VPN that just works. More information at expressvpn.com/Tom.
So our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is Unsettled by Ryan Hampton. The subtitle is How the Purdue Pharma Bankruptcy Failed the Victims of the American Overdose Crisis. And this is from the introduction. August 17th, 2018. Thick thunderclouds darkened the horizon, turning the beautiful Stamford, Connecticut sky from blue to nearly black. Within moments, my shirt was soaked with sweat as the August humidity crept down my collar. I heard the voices before I even got to the Purdue Pharma building. As I pulled into a parking spot, my ears started to ring. The shouting grew louder as I hustled through the glittering monolith on Tresser Boulevard. The police were already here, shielding the front of the building in a blockade formation. Hundreds of people crowded the plaza. The noise hit me like a wall, and I stumbled as I went into the press of bodies working my way forward. The ground was covered in shreds of paper, protest messages that people were stuffing into orange plastic pill bottles and leaving on the steps. The officers didn't move. Locked in place, they were there to back Purdue. Standing in the shadow of the building, my sweat turned to ice water. I looked up, craning my neck to take in the whole monstrosity. One Stamford Forum was the mother ship. 10 floors of glass windows and dark chrome reflecting the coming storm down at us. It felt nearly abandoned, even on a Friday afternoon when people should have been coming and going to their jobs. The stillness was eerie, as though the building were listening to us, planning its next move. I felt as if I were looking up at the Death Star for the first time. That's no moon. One Stamford wasn't just a corporate office. It was a national monument to American greed. The 505,000 square foot building at 201 Tresser was stuffed with Purdue offices. This was ground zero. Inside these walls, the Sackler family-owned company had run the numbers, drawn up marketing plans, and executed their strategies. The company committed cold-blooded corporate genocide, rubber-stamped by the FDA and co-signed by the free market. More blood had been spilled in that building than I could comprehend. My stomach clenched with nausea. I felt as if I were standing at the gates of hell. On the third floor, in one of the lacquered panes that overlooked the plaza, I could see figures standing at the window. 3 or 4 people clustered together, holding their phones and pointing down at the crowd. I narrowed my eyes. They were taping us. They were laughing. I'd tear the place to pieces, with my own hands if necessary. My voice joined the chant that swelled around me. The protest was a furious hurricane, filling the plaza and battering the windows of the Purdue building. I'll end them, I thought to myself. If it's the last thing I do, I will take this place down along with everything it ever stood for. I got the phone call a year later on a beautiful sunny Sunday afternoon in September 2019. It was the long Labor Day weekend, and I was at the Bronx Zoo with my 2 favorite people for a last-minute vacation. I let go of my fiance's hand to answer the phone. Sean, who was used to work interrupting our dates and outings, smiled at me and turned away to talk to my mom. They pointed at the red parkas in the nearest enclosure while I pressed my phone to my ear. Purdue's filing for bankruptcy, the voice on the other end said. Yeah, whatever. I got a lot of calls like this. Everyone had a theory about Purdue, and information spread like wildfire between advocates, reporters, and lobbyists. A lot of it was old news by the time it got to me. We all knew the same stuff because we'd worked tirelessly to take down Purdue and bring them to justice for encouraging and profiting off a national drug epidemic that had claimed hundreds of thousands of lives. No, it's really happening, she said. What I learned in that phone call altered the course of almost 2 years of my life, although it felt like 20. I didn't know what it meant, but by the time I hung up and turned back to Sean and my mom, the gears of history were turning at lightning speed. Within 2 weeks, Purdue Pharma did file for bankruptcy. Before I knew it, I was in a room packed with every person I'd ever squared off with. That day was the last calm moment I experienced for the next 22 months. Life before the Purdue case wasn't exactly smooth sailing, but I navigated the waves with some help from my partner and my friends. I wasn't new to being a disruptor, but I was about to be catapulted to a level of involvement I hadn't imagined was possible for people such as me. Previously, I'd worked to support a range of policy issues and devoted countless hours to advance forward-thinking addiction recovery legislation. I knew what the numbers were in the crisis. I saw firsthand how addiction tore families apart, destroyed entire communities, and killed our most vulnerable people. In the first years of my recovery, I lost more than 24 friends to preventable overdoses. I visited dozens of communities as part of a documentary project in 2016 called Addiction X America, and witnessed the losses sustained by ordinary families everywhere. I stayed in homes with parents who'd lost children to Purdue Pharma's best-selling painkiller, OxyContin. I ate at the tables of families that would never be the same. I vowed that I would bring justice to them and all the people who, like myself, had lost years of their lives to Purdue's rapacious hunger for profits. I told these stories in testimony I delivered to Congress, in front of thousands of people calling for change, and at the gates of institutions with the Sackler family name emblazoned over them. I wrote my first book, American Fix, Inside the Opioid Addiction Crisis and How to End It, which was published in 2018. I've talked about the crisis on.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Hey, happy Friday, TGIF, Shabbat Shalom, Juma Mubarak, whatever it may be for you. In just a moment, we're going to start our progressive town hall meeting with Congressman Khanna in our first hour. We'll get to that in just a second. Also, in the second hour of the program, we're going to get into the newest Big Pharma scam exposed. You ever heard of march-in authorization? It's an amazing thing. Big Pharma's obscenely priced drugs developed with our tax dollars will continue draining working people of income, savings, and, frankly, ultimately their health until America recognizes health care as a right. Also, I want to dig into AT&T using our commons to get super wealthy, and now they're destroying the planet, in part through One America News. In our third hour, how do we protect government institutions from dictator wannabes? And we've got a crazy alert about Franklin Graham. He says it's communism for the FBI to investigate threats against school board members. Say, what? Really? But we start with Congressman Khanna, the vice chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus. He represents the 17th District of California in the U.S. House of Representatives. His website is Khanna, KHANNA.house.gov. His Twitter handle is Khanna. And he will be with us for the hour, taking your calls at 202-808-9925. Congressman, welcome to the program, or welcome back to the program. I'm curious your thoughts, if I may, to begin, on this idea. I laid it out in my rant yesterday that if Biden can't get a big agenda passed, and therefore the American people can't see that Democrats can actually govern in a way that benefits them, and this shifts the momentum to the Republicans, as some are suggesting. I don't know if you've seen Ezra Klein's piece in today's Washington Post. Could that mean that the next president, who would presumably be a Republican, might be America's last president, that we would see, the country going down the road of Trump-style dictatorship? Congressman? He's on hybrid number 2.
Can you hear me?
Now I hear you, yes.
Okay, great. I think there's much reason to be concerned of the consequences if we don't pass the agenda. I mean, the striking thing about Ezra's article is the most popular policies that transcend party, that transcend race, that appeal to the white working class as well, are Medicare negotiation for prescription drugs, are giving seniors dental and vision benefits, are making sure that we have a child tax credit. It's basically Bernie's agenda, and that's not coincidental because Bernie went across the country and he resonated in rural America and in white working class communities as well as black and brown communities. And so the failure to implement a popular agenda, I think it will be devastating to our party. It would mean losses in 22, 24. Now, I have more faith probably in American democracy and the culture of democracy and in the opportunism and volatility of voters that I don't think Trump can put an end to democracy. I also don't think he's a serious enough of purpose to be able to do it, but it certainly would be a huge blow to American democracy.
Well, if Rick Scott was elected president, or Ron DeSantis, or Tom Cotton, or Josh Hawley, or one of these guys, I'm of the opinion that they could end democracy very rapidly using Trump's playbook, and I think they're all smarter than Trump. But
and some of it may be semantics, right? I mean, it may not be a formal end to democracy, but if you're disenfranchising black voters and if you're disenfranchising Latino voters and you're kicking people off the rolls and you already have an anti-democratic Senate, they certainly will be further eroding democratic rights and entrenching a minority rule, which is basically what we have in the Supreme Court. I mean, it's mind-boggling if you look at the ideology of the Supreme Court compared to the ideology of where most Americans are. It's a very anti-majoritarian institution. So, the risk is that it won't just be the Senate. You could actually have the governing bodies of this country turn to be anti-majoritarian.
Yeah, it's remarkable. The other question I had for you before we start here was I've noticed that my op-ed today is about big pharma and how this scam that they've been running with taxpayer-funded research and everything, and it appears that starting early this year, in March or April of this year, Big Pharma started just pouring cash into Kyrsten Sinema's coffers. Is this a strategy of, and not even specifically Big Pharma? I remember the days when the tobacco industry just basically bought everybody, and the fossil fuel industry just basically bought everybody. And is it a new strategy on the part of some of these industries to selectively pick out the one person who can just kill anything, kill it in committee? We had, Oregon's Kurt Schrader here trying to kill Medicare drug pricing, Medicare drug negotiation in committee. He voted against it. He's a Democrat, and he voted against it. He's taking big money from Pharma. He's an heir to a Pharma fortune, too. Is that a strategy, or, your thoughts on that?
It absolutely is. It took me a while to realize this because, and I'm not saying I'm, holier than thou, but I never had met pharma lobbyists or lobbyists in some of these other industries. And I thought, my impression was they try to get everyone. And then I realized that they're actually far savvier because I talked to colleagues who had never really dealt with them either. They're actually so savvy that it's not even one person. It's not even Senator Sinema. They basically look at the given moment on the chessboard and say, who are the 2 or 3 people we need to make sure that this bill or legislation is killed? And that can change year to year. It can change Congress to Congress. And that's what makes it so difficult, because you could have 90% of the Congress potentially free of their influence, and they will still find the few people to block the legislation. So they're playing a very sophisticated game.
That's amazing. Okay, before we pick up our phone calls, anything you wanted to mention? What you're up to your eyebrows in Congress-wise and stuff like that.
I just think we've got to pass this bill, the president's agenda, and realize, again, as Ezra Klein's article said, he quotes David Shore, who's an Obama guy and sympathetic to Bill Clinton. And he says we need to do things that are popular, and not things that are too too far to the left, as Shore put it. So I thought, oh no, I'm going to look at the analysis. Is he talking about not doing things that progressives have been pushing for? Turns out the things that are popular are exactly what Sanders and the progressive left have been talking about: Medicare negotiation, benefits for seniors, making sure that you have child tax credit, and can take care of your kids. Overwhelmingly popular. I just don't understand how we're going to sabotage our chances of the president by not getting behind things that are universally popular.
Yeah, amen. Congressman Khanna with us for the hour, taking your calls. Patrick in East Lansing, Michigan, watching us on Facebook Live. Hey, Patrick, you're on the air with Congressman Khanna.
I really appreciate what the Progressive Caucus has done, and kudos to you for where you're at on this reconciliation bill. I have two quick questions about it. One has to do with the debt limit. And what I don't understand, I know the House initiates budget bills and appropriations, and so it's got to come from you. But the Senate then agrees with 50 votes to pass a budget, and then they can filibuster when it comes to pay the debt that the budget incurred. And President Biden called them on that yesterday and the day before, but he has the power to make it 50 votes and get rid of the filibuster on the debt limit increase. So I just would like to hear a cogent explanation for why the president and the Senate Democrats are not going to go for 50 votes to raise the debt limit. And my other question has to do with moderates who were trying to block this and now look like they're going to come along. In the East Lansing, Representative Flockton's now going to daycare places and telling us how they're going to give us better daycare and paid sick leave, and starting to tell constituents what they're actually going to get for this bill and getting behind it. So what advice would you give to the moderates in the problem caucus who are fighting you, who now are going to get behind it? How can they, without too much compromising how difficult their districts are, project out this message so that they can survive voting for this? Those are my two questions.
Patrick, thank you, and thanks for joining on Facebook Live. I usually join on video, but I have a bit of a cold, so didn't want to be sniffling on screen. I agree with both of your points. First, the point on raising the debt limit, we can do this. We can do it by overcoming the filibuster. In fact, I think one of the reasons McConnell was willing to make the deal is that he knew that this could be the straw that breaks the camel's back, and that Manchin and Sinema may just agree to break the filibuster if it came to not defaulting. So we'll see how it plays out in December, but I agree that the president should increase the pressure on breaking the filibuster. If you're not going to do it to safeguard voting rights, you may want to at least do it to safeguard the total collapse of our economy. And it seems like that could at least motivate Joe Manchin. Melissa Slotkin is terrific in her district. Obviously, I'm progressive. She's more moderate. But the way she talks about it is she goes to families and she says, you're not going to pay more than 7% of your income in child care. That's what this bill means for you. And we have to find ways of being simple, direct. How are you going to benefit? How is your family going to benefit? I'm all for roads and bridges and broadband. We also need to talk directly to families. This is what it's going to mean for your kids, in your pockets tomorrow after the bill passes. And the more we can do that, the better chances of getting it through.
And Joseph in Bovey, Minnesota. Hey, Joseph, we have 1 minute to the break here. You're on the air with Congressman Khanna. You got a quick one?
Yeah, I do. Every few years, it seems like the things like the Panama Papers and now the Pandora Papers come up, and I was wondering if Congress is going to do anything to address this issue. Thank you.
Thank you.
Joseph, the what papers? Tom, I missed.
The Pandora Papers and the Panama Papers. You know, there's wealthy people stashing money in offshore and South Dakota.
You're absolutely right. Joseph, look, they've been so many of these reports of the billionaires, the corporations not paying money, not paying their tax. I had the Tax Enforcement Act, which simply said you could raise $1 billion just enforcing the current laws. People aren't engaged in tax evasion. Some of that is still in the reconciliation bill. I hope it passes. But one of the things that is very interesting to me is if you couple policies saying, here's what we're going to do, and we're going to tax the rich to do it, the tax the rich actually makes it more popular. So it's good politics and substance to do right.
Yeah, there you go. Congressman Khanna is with us for the hour, taking your calls in a National Progressive Town Hall meeting. It's 18 minutes past the hour. We'll be back with more of your calls for Congressman Khanna, Vice Chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus, right after this.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Congressman Khanna's website is Khanna, KHANNA.house.gov. You can tweet him at @RepRoKhanna. And welcome back. Paul in Shelton, Washington, listening on KMAS. You are on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Yes, Congressman. Would you sponsor legislation to establish a program to provide a monthly stipend to Afghanistan women who are allowed to work outside the home? And you could have a small portion of this would be a tithe to the local mosque, so that way they have some skin in the game?
This sounds like a setup question here, Paul. Congressman.
Look, I support redevelopment efforts in Afghanistan, and the U.S. has an obligation after 20 years in war to focus on helping redevelopment in ways that encourage human rights and women empowerment. But I leave the structure of how that should be done to the experts who know the humanitarian situation.
Bruce in Petaluma, California. You're on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Hi, thanks for taking my call. I have a question regarding the fascist idea that Trump is promoting and seems to be the whole Republican Party. What's the end reward? I don't get that part. There's plenty of wealth in this country already, plenty of billionaires and millionaires. What else is there? Just rule by force or whatever? What is it? What's the end result? I don't get the goal.
It's a good question. And in Trump's case, I don't think it's very profound. I don't think he has some overarching vision of what he wants America to be. I think he just is upset that he lost, and he's offended that he didn't get to be a two-term popular president, and he has grievances that he got impeached, and he doesn't like being seen as a loser, and he's willing to risk literally everything we value about this country and our Constitution and our processes for his own ego. So I don't think there's some meta vision that he's fighting for. I think it is petty egoism.
Don in San Francisco, you're on with Congressman Khanna.
Thank you, gentlemen. Yes, here I live in California. I just got back from a trip from New York, and I don't know how many times I met people and they said, "What's going on with California and that recall?" Are you guys doing anything to change those recall rules? Because it's only used against the Democrats, and it's not a good thing.
We are. I appreciate that. We're hoping to get it onto the ballot next election. To change it, it would require a constitutional amendment. But we saw how useless it was. I mean, even with Gavin Newsom's challenges, he ended up getting as much of the vote as he did in the election a year and a half before. And so it was a total waste of resources, total waste of energy. And I think a 4-year term is perfectly appropriate. And if someone commits terrible crimes or misdemeanors, you can impeach them. I just don't think you should be recalling people in the midst of their term. And so we are trying to change that.
So the we being the California Democrats, not the House of Representatives. Democrats.
Yeah, exactly. The state assembly, and then it has to go onto the ballot. And so it has to be a referendum in my understanding.
Right, got it. Congressman Ro Khanna with us for the hour, taking your calls. It's 22 minutes past the hour here on the Thom Hartmann Program. You can check out his website at Khanna, KHANNA.house.gov. You can tweet him at @RepRoKhanna. Stick around. We'll be right back. It's 22 minutes past the hour. Change starts with you. You can be calling your Democratic or Republican representatives to let them know what you think by calling 202-224-3121. It's the Capital Switchboard. It'll get you right through to them. So we have a new video up over at ThomHartmann.com. It's about 18 U.S. Code 2384, which is a law that was published back in or put on the books on June 25th, 1948. It was updated in 1956. And it's very, very straightforward. It says, if two or more persons in any state or territory or in any place subject to the jurisdiction of the United States conspire to overthrow, put down, or destroy by force the government of the United States, or to levy war against them, or to oppose by force the authority thereof, or by force to prevent, hinder, or delay the execution of any law of the United States, or by force to seize, take, or possess any property of the United States, they shall be fined under this title or imprisoned for not more than 20 years or both. Tell me that doesn't perfectly describe what happened on January 6th. Seditious conspiracy. The video's at ThomHartmann.com. Check it out. Monroe Khanna taking your calls for the hour here on the Thom Hartmann program. And Pam in Chicago. Pam, you are on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Hello, I hope you feel better, Representative. And it's so strange time to hear someone with a common cold.
Indeed.
So,
Hopefully that's
it's
all it is.
Yeah, so feel better. So quickly, you're welcome. And I hope I'm asking this right. My concern is, first and foremost, if the Republicans get control, they're a destabilizing force in our country. And I don't hear that talked about enough. I'm talking serious destabilization. So if we get the bill passed, I'm concerned that we need to maintain control of the House of Representatives in order to make sure that the monies are appropriated where they will help the people. So I think that could be a selling point, because I'm always hearing it's inevitable that we're going to lose the House, and I hope that that is sincerely not true. And my last point is, if I don't even want to talk, if we lose the House, how are we going to ensure that the families are taken care of? And also, the Democratic Party needs to ask the question, why is there so much contempt for the working class and the poor? Tom, I heard your discussion about more people have fell into the working poor as opposed to middle class. So raise those issues and talk in dollars about child care. People pay child care on a weekly or maybe a monthly basis. Talk about the dollars.
Pam, we have just 1 minute left for Congressman Khanna's response. Thank you.
Well, I appreciate all your points. I mean, first of all, I completely agree with you that there's not some determinism that we're going to lose the House, and I'm very skeptical of these data prognosticators in any election. I think people have agencies, parties have agencies, and we pass this agenda and say that to implement it, to make it real, to have it continue, we need the House, we need the Senate. I think we have a fighting chance, a good chance. If we don't pass the popular parts, it's a much harder battle. It's a good point in terms of talking about child care very concretely, dollars and cents. You know, now you're paying almost $1,000 a month for child care. That is going to come down to the maximum of $300 a month. I mean, I think those specifics matter. And you're absolutely right about the poor, the working class. I mean, that's what this bill is geared towards.
Congressman Monroe Khanna with us for the hour, the Vice Chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus, taking your calls for the hour here on the Thom Hartmann program, our National Progressive Town Hall meeting. You can find his website at Khanna, KHANNA.house.gov, and you can tweet him at RepRoKhanna. It's 27 minutes past the hour. We'll be right back with more of your calls for Congressman Monroe Khanna.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Representative Monroe Khanna taking your calls for the hour. Back with your calls right after this break. Today we're reading from David Blight's book, Frederick Douglass, Prophet of Freedom. This is from the introduction. In his speech at the dedication of the National Museum of African American History and Culture in Washington, D.C., September 24, 2016,
President Barack Obama delivered what he termed a, quote, clear-eyed view of a tragic and triumphant history of black Americans in the United States. He spoke of a history that is central to the larger American story, one that is both contradictory and extraordinary. He likened the African-American experience to the infinite depths of Shakespeare and Scripture. The, quote, embrace of truth as best we can know it, said the president, is, quote, where real patriotism lies. Naming some of the major pivots of the country's past, Obama wrapped up his central theme in a remarkable sentence about the Civil War era. Quote, we've buttoned up our Union blues to join the fight for our freedom. We've railed against injustice for decade upon decade, a lifetime of struggle and progress and enlightenment that we see etched in Frederick Douglass's mighty leonine gaze, end quote. How Americans react to Douglass's gaze, indeed how we gaze back at his visage, and more important, how we read him, appropriate him, or engage his legacies, informs how we use our past to determine who we are. Douglass's life and writing emerged from nearly the full scope of the 19th century, representative of the best and the worst in the American spirit. Douglass constantly probed the ironies of America's contradictions over slavery and race. Few Americans use Shakespeare and the Bible to comprehend his story and that of his people as much as Douglass. And there may be no better example of an American radical patriot than the slave who became a lyrical prophet of freedom, natural rights, and human equality. Obama channeled Douglass in his dedication speech, knowingly or not. So do many people today. Born Frederick Augustus Washington Bailey, a slave, in Talbot County, Maryland, in February 1818, the future Frederick Douglass was the son of Harriet Bailey, one of 5 daughters of Betsy Bailey, and with some likelihood his mother's white owner. He saw his mother for the last time in 1825, though he hardly knew her. She died the following year. Douglass lived 20 years as a slave and nearly 9 years as a fugitive slave subject to recapture. From the 1840s to his death in 1895, he attained international fame as an abolitionist, editor, orator of almost unparalleled signature, and the author of 3 autobiographies that are classics of the genre. As a public man, he began his abolitionist career 2 decades before America would divide and fight a civil war over slavery that he openly welcomed. Douglass was born in a backwater of the slave society of the South, just as steamboats appeared in bays and on American rivers, and before the telegraph, the railroad, and the rotary press changed human mobility and consciousness. He died after the emergence of electric lights, the telephone, and the invention of the phonograph. The renewed orator and traveler loved and used most of these elements of modernity and technology. Douglass was the most photographed American of the 19th century, explained in this book, and especially by the intrepid research of 3 other scholars I write upon. Although it can never really be measured, he may also have been, along with Mark Twain, the most widely traveled American public figure of his century. By the 1890s, in sheer miles and countless number of speeches, he had few rivals as a lecturer in the golden age of oratory. It is likely that more Americans heard Frederick Douglass speak than any other public figure of his time. Indeed, to see or hear Douglass became a kind of wonder of the American world. He struggled as well with the pleasures and perils of fame as much as anyone else in his century, with the possible exceptions of General Ulysses S. Grant or P.T. Barnum. Douglass's dilemma with fame was a matter of decades, not merely of moments, and fraught with racism. The orator and writer lived to see and interpret black emancipation, to work actively for women's rights long before they were achieved, to realize the civil rights triumphs and tragedies of Reconstruction, and to witness and contribute to America's economic and international expansion in the Gilded Age. He lived to the age of lynching and Jim Crow laws, when America collapsed into retreat from the real victories and revolutions in race relations that he had helped to win. He played a pivotal role in America's second founding out of the apocalypse of the Civil War, and he very much wished to see himself as a founder and defender of the Second American Republic. In one lifetime of anti-slavery, literary, and political activism, Douglass was many things, and the set of apparent paradoxes makes his story so attractive to biographers, as well as to so many constituencies today. He was a radical thinker and a proponent of classic 19th century political liberalism. At different times, he hated and loved his country. He was a ferocious critic of the United States and all its hypocrisies, but also, after emancipation, became a government bureaucrat, a diplomat, and a voice for territorial expansion. He strongly believed in self-reliance and demanded an activist interventionist government at all levels to free slaves, defeat the Confederacy, and to protect black citizens against terror and discrimination. Douglas was a serious constitutional thinker, and few Americans have ever analyzed race with more poignancy and nuance than this mostly self-taught genius with words. He was a radical editor, writer, and activist. The book, Frederick Douglass, by David Blight.
Missed my opening rant today? It's usually published over at HartmannReport.com, where you can read it and share it with your friends for free. Check it out, HartmannReport.com. Welcome back. Congressman Khanna is with us for the hour. National Progressive Town Hall meeting, taking your calls. He's vice chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus and represents the 17th District of California. Let's see here. Paul in Woodinville, Washington. You're on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Yes, Tom and Congressman. I'd like to know what's to be done about these right-wing groups around the country that are using violence and intimidation to essentially scare off supporters of Democratic candidates. I don't know if you're aware, because the news media coverage was so bad about President Biden's visit to Livingston County, Michigan, city of Howell, where he was met by a violent mob that here's what they did. And I have connections there, a family and Democratic friends there, and I was talking to the chairwoman of the Democratic Party of Livingston County. She said this is what they did. Used a bullhorn to yell F Biden, and even got the bullhorn into the faces of the Biden supporters yelling F you and F Biden. One man had a chainsaw running and was revving it and thrusting it at supporters of President Biden. They ran heavy-duty equipment, trucks and tractor loaders up and down the street to make it unsafe to be in the street. And eventually they surrounded all the supporters and squeezed them together like a giant mob, and squeezed all the Biden supporters together until everyone left. All the supporters of President Biden left because it was so dangerous. Calls to the Livingston County Sheriff brought no response, and actually the chairwoman of the Democratic Party in Livingston County stopped a Michigan State trooper cruiser and said, look what they're doing to us. And the trooper said, that's not my problem, and drove on. What's to be done? Eventually, you know what's going to happen. The word stand your ground is going to have to take place, and you know what that means, Congressman. What do you suggest Democrats do if we're going to be intimidated this way?
This is the brown shirts.
Well, Paul, it's first of all outrageous and shocking what you detail. And that, just to be clear, none of that is protected by the First Amendment. You have no right to engage in physical threats of violence. You have no right to prevent people from having the peaceful assembly. If anything, they're violating people's First Amendment rights. So they should be arrested. I mean, that's what should happen. And I'm surprised, especially with the presidential visit, probably the security concerns were so much on him and his entourage. But you're right to point out that they have to be also for all of the people gathering. And there ought to be the rule of law. You can't incite or threaten violence against people in public places.
Van in Lewiston, Ohio. You're on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Yes, good afternoon, Tom and Senator and Congressman. You know, I'm really frustrated, so I'm going to try to make this brief. I do not understand. I voted for Biden, and I still have this funny feeling in my stomach about him. He treats black people at arm's length all the time. You know, to me, he's hiding behind his vaccine, so he won't talk about voting. We are out here fighting our butts off trying to get this vote. Nothing matters if he don't get the voting rights, passed. The climate doesn't matter. His agenda doesn't matter. Nothing matters. And then he relegates these hard tasks to his vice president, Kamala Harris. And, if he's frustrated, how do you think she feel? He needs to get out there and have his bullhorn and start talking about this and stop hiding behind the vaccine. I don't hear him saying anything. So yeah, I am very frustrated. And if he don't get out there and do something, I promise you, black people are going to stay home from now on because nobody have our back like he said he was supposed to have ours. Okay, that's all I have to say, and thank you very much for listening.
Congressman? Congressman, I think maybe your phone got muted again.
I hear and appreciate and understand your frustration. I mean, it's appalling that we haven't made progress on the Voting Rights Act. I do agree with you that the president needs to be out front and center, demanding this every day, campaigning on it, calling out the one or two people who are standing in the way, saying this is the civil rights issue of our time. I agree with you. He shouldn't just delegate this to the vice president, as capable as she is. This requires presidential leadership, and some of us in the House think this is the most important thing. Our democracy depends on not disenfranchising people, and if they get away with it this time, they can entrench these reforms that disenfranchise black and brown people. So we will continue to advocate with the White House that he needs to be front and center and make this the highest priority.
Don in Wheaton, Illinois, you are on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Yes, hi. I just wanted to make sure that everybody saw that spot on Democracy Now! Amy had brought in a Greenpeace spy that had spoke and videotaped Exxon Mobil lobbyist, and they just rattled on, and they said, yeah, on the Democratic side, Joe Manchin is our point man. And he was laughing about it, and this all seems so obvious. And I still hear in the news about, well, I wonder why Joe Manchin is not going along. What's holding him back? Well, it seems pretty obvious. And I just wanted to make sure you guys are aware of that. And just another reason why we need to get money out of politics.
Well, I appreciate that. And as you may know, I'm going to be having a hearing with Exxon, Chevron, BP, Shell, all their CEOs before our committee exactly about one of the incidents with McCoy, who was bragging on TV that he was killing climate legislation. And we're going to ask very pointedly, what are these companies doing to kill climate legislation, to spread climate disinformation, and get them under oath to commit to stop. But they need to be held accountable. They're spending millions of dollars on disinformation and killing legislation, and that is what's standing in the way of progress.
Rocco in Chicago, you are on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Thank you. I have to say I am a very scared person. I really believe that Donald Trump should be arrested. I think that he should be held either without bond or maybe like $20 billion with a B bond. I sincerely believe that as we wait for subpoenas, there is a radicalization going on that's going to lead to civil war. Now, I can't stay cool about this because you have...
So, Rocco, what's your question for the Congressman, Rocco?
U.S.
What's your question?
Well, what influence can the Progressive Caucus have in getting something accomplished directly? You have Congress people...
We got it. Thank you.
Well, I think Rocco's question is, what can the Progressive Caucus do to get Trump held accountable? And we're doing everything we can. I mean, we're holding oversight hearings. We're encouraging the investigations to continue. We have said to the Justice Department they need to continue the prosecution and where the facts will lead them, and that there needs to be an accountability for the crimes and laws that were broken. And so we are on the same page that the investigations need to continue.
Ryan in Grand Rapids, Michigan. You're on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Hi, Tom. Hi, Congressman. Thank you for doing this. I just wanted, I've been listening to a lot of interviews that Paul Jay has done with Lawrence Wilkerson, Mikey Weinstein, who is, let me pull it up, he's the founder of the Military Religious Freedom Foundation. And it sounds like they have a lot of concerns about religious fanaticism in the military. I was wondering, are there any plans for Congress to do any investigations concerning religious fanaticism in the military? Thank you.
Well, my concern is discrimination, bigotry of all kinds, and there's no tolerance for that in the military, and we've spoken to Secretary Austin about that. Obviously, there's a balance, and someone should be entitled to their religious convictions, but your religious convictions should not allow you to discriminate or demean another person. And so I think the investigations and the focus needs to be on a broader non-discrimination policy that I'm confident Secretary Austin is implementing.
Marie in Atlanta, Georgia. You're on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Yes, thank you for taking my call, and good afternoon, Congressman Khanna. I'd actually like to switch to something that's a little more remote in terms of the idea. When there are some municipalities, some governments that did not sign on to Social Security, so they do not contribute for Social Security to their employees. Many of them, and these were decisions made decades ago, many of those municipalities have instead pension plans. But as you know, in the past decades, within this century, they have run into problems with paying those pension benefits. And some of them at the beginning of the 21st century signed on to the 401A, which is similar to a 401K, but it is characterized as a Social Security replacement. It is essentially privatized Social Security, and you don't even want to hear the horror I went through when the Great Recession began in 2008. But here's the problem. When the employee retires, if they have earned Social Security benefits from other employment, those benefits are paid out at a lower rate because of what's called a windfall penalty. The employee actually receives a lower benefit because of those years that, not due to any choice of their own, they were not contributing to Social Security. And the way that it works out is that there's no mechanism by which the employee could decide, you know what, I know I'm not contributing to Social Security, I'll do it myself. There is no mechanism for that. So I'm wondering if there is any appetite, any understanding of this issue. It's a flaw in the creation of this 401A that I am hoping will get resolved, because I'm looking at, personally, after a decade of public service, and I do mean really good service, I'm looking at a windfall penalty of 40%, meaning my benefits will be reduced by 40%.
Wow.
Well, I hear you, and I... First, please contact either us or your member of Congress to see if we can assist with that. But the Social Security Fairness Act that John Larson has introduced and that many of us are on fixes this, we need to get a vote on it in the House, and we need to get it passed to the Senate. But it fixes some of these quirks where people aren't getting the benefits that they deserve.
It's 46 minutes past the hour. Congressman Khanna, Vice Chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus, representing California's 17th District in the U.S. House, is with us for the hour, taking your calls on a National Progressive Town Hall meeting on the Thom Hartmann Program. We'll be back with more of your calls for Congressman Khanna in just a moment.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
You can find Congressman Khanna's website at Khanna, KHANNA.house.gov. You can tweet him at @RepRoKhanna. And welcome back. Charles in Santa Monica, you're on the air with Congressman Khanna. Thanks for listening to KPFK.
Oh, thank you for taking my call. So in order for us to be a more effective progressive populace and to be able to leverage that with our congresspersons, I'm wondering, do we know who the contributors are in this current round? As you were speaking before, that they only need to mess up the works, they only need to gain influence on one or two representatives, right? So do we know who the contributors are to in this case, cinema and mansion, so that the people could mount a shaming expose of those corporations, because they're the ones who are the roadblock.
We do. Unfortunately, a lot of times it's disguised as third-party groups. The corporations are contributing to third-party groups, and so they're not directly there. Sometimes it's through their PACs. Sometimes it's very diffuse, so there'll be 50 to 100 of them that all congregate to do it, so no one person stands out. But it's all public information, who funds cinema. The fundraisers have been in the news, and you're right to call attention to the donor interest in cases where policies are overwhelmingly popular.
Johan in Los Angeles, you're on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Hi, Congressman, and I have a question about the California high-speed rail project.
Yes.
Are you for it, with or against it?
I'm for it. I think it could have been better handled. It could get off to a great start, but I'm for it.
Jeff in Portland, Oregon, you're on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Hey, good morning, Tom and Rep. Khanna. Thanks as always for the town hall. Congressman Khanna, given the two states they represented, it's astounding Mansion and Cinema aren't willing to recognize how much their states will benefit from the Build Back Better Act. West Virginia is near last in so many categories, healthcare, education, income. Arizona has a large senior population and is ground zero for the extreme drought and climate change. So, Congressman Khanna, will you explain how the smaller infrastructure bill does little or nothing to address the climate crisis, and B, according to Michael Hiltz's column in Wednesday's LA Times, the Department of Interior does no monitoring, absolutely no monitoring or inspecting of underwater oil pipelines. It's all up to the companies to self-regulate. What can be done to change that? And we really need to stop Line 3 and shut down Line 5. Thank you, Congressman. Feel better soon.
Thank you. Well, I'm against Line 3, and I appreciate your advocacy there. We wrote to the appropriate regulatory agencies and are starting an investigation of what can be done. Apparently, this company was in violation with the oil pipeline that broke, and how we can have better oversight. You're absolutely right in terms of, look, my district in Silicon Valley, the taxes are going up to help states like Arizona and West Virginia. The corporations and the multimillionaires are going to be paying more tax are in my district, and the benefits will disproportionately be going to communities and states left behind. So I completely agree with you that we need to make that point, that this is actually going to help a lot of the middle class of the country, a lot of the South.
Yeah. Congressman Ro Khanna taking your calls for the hour here on the Thom Hartmann Program. It's our progressive national town hall meeting. We'll be back with more of Congressman Khanna's answers to your questions in just a moment. You can find his website at Khanna, KHANNA.house.gov. You can tweet him at Rep. Ro Khanna. We'll be right back. It's about 9 minutes before the hour. Our 1 hour free podcast recaps our show, and it's available wherever fine podcasts are found. And we have the full 3 hour podcast available over at ThomHartmann.com if you want to really support our program. Welcome back. 51 minutes past the hour. Congressman Ro Khanna on the line with us. Jake in Elizabeth, Pennsylvania. You are on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Good morning, gentlemen. My question is, will y'all discuss the implications of the Ninth Amendment that says the enumeration of the Constitution of certain rights shall not be construed, denied, or disparage others retained by the people, particularly in context with the Declaration of Independence. It says, from the consent of the governed. That seems to indicate we the people are supposed to run the country, not the oligarchs. And I'd like y'all's opinions along those lines.
Thank you, Jake.
Jake, I think you're absolutely right. I mean, we have rights that are not enumerated in the Constitution. Among those are what FDR said, economic rights, the right to have a dignity of one's labor and not to just be dominated by large economic conglomerates and not have the ability to have freedom in the workplace and dignity in the workplace. And so you're right that we need to have a fairer economic system, and that's what the president's agenda on Build Back Better is a step towards.
Joe in Cupertino, California, you're on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Thanks. I didn't think I was going to get in. Congressman, I hope you feel better. I appreciated Town Hall that we had yesterday. I wanted to ask you a question, though. You know, nuclear arms are down at 87% or 88% of what they were at their height in 1967. And I know that this is a big issue for you, but, you know, Joe Biden seems to be of the opinion that we don't need to reinvest in arcane old ballistic missiles either. And it's a cost of, $770 trillion over 10 years or whatever it is. And, you know, I think if we could just do better, and I think maybe 70% would be a great way. I'm really concerned about what's going on in China, and this reduction in nuclear arms suggests that we're not trying to start a nuclear war. We're trying to prevent any aggression. What do you think? You sit on the committee that has some say there. Maybe we could get a reduction in the continue or reduce what we already have. And I'll listen offline. Thank you.
Absolutely. Well, I'm pleased that the President Biden and the Biden administration made the numbers public of our nuclear weapons archive, and it's much, much lower than at the height of the Cold War. It's still a overwhelming deterrent force against Russia or China, much, much more potent than China many times over. And what some of us have said is we don't need to modernize the ICBMs and spend more money modernizing it. And Rep. Garamendi and I have been leading the effort on the Armed Services Committee to say stop the modernization and instead spend this money on building our nation here at home.
Bob in Aventura, Florida. You are on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Yeah, hi, Congressman Khanna and Tom. Thank you for having me on. I have a question as far as with the January 6th insurrection. We're 10 months past that point, and many of the people who were arrested for protests, well, actually, their insurrection, only got a slap on the wrist. And in my eyes, what they virtually did, along with the Trump followers, was commit treason. And in the 50s, we had the Rosenbergs who were executed for treason due to the prosecution from Roy Cohn. Should not that be on the table somewhere for some of these people who are instigating this?
Bob, I agree with you that we need to prosecute these, that they need to face the consequences. I will let the Justice Department handle that, but they need to be aggressive in prosecuting anyone who violated the law, stormed the Capitol, scaled the Capitol, tried to subvert the democratic process. And I'm confident that they will do that.
I'm assuming, though, that you're not in favor of the death penalty for these people, which is what he was implying.
No, I'm not for the death. No. Did he suggest the death penalty? No.
Yeah,
I'm opposed
he brought up the Rosenbergs. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I've always been opposed to the death penalty. I just don't think that human justice is perfect enough to make that kind of ultimate decision on life and death. And so I oppose the death penalty, but I do think that they should be prosecuted and held accountable.
Yeah, it's surprising to me how many calls we got today that I think might have been people trying to get you to say things that could be used in Republican ads against you. Anyhow, we've got about 15 seconds. Thoughts for the next week?
Well, we made progress in trying to get to a compromise amongst Republican and amongst our Democratic colleagues. I am confident we're going to get this done. I really think that the vision should be to do all the programs but have less years in them, and we can reach a compromise. But we have to get this done, Tom. It's the single most important thing in my 5 years of Congress to deliver on this.
I'm completely with you. Congressman Khanna, thanks so much. Feel better soon.
Thank you. Thanks for having me on.
Always a pleasure. We'll be right back with Anything Goes Friday on the Thom Hartmann Program. It's, it's the top. It's 57 minutes past the hour.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
These companies support the Thom Hartmann Program. They are HelloFresh, the #1 meal kit delivery service. More info at HelloFresh.com, code TOM. CB Distillery, CBD for sleep and pain relief. More info is available at cbdistillery.com, code TOM. Ground News, a well-rounded perspective for news readers. More info at ground.news/Tom. Angie, for any project on your to-do list. More info at Angie.com. Dinovite, a whole food supplement for your pet's immune system. More info at Dinovite.com. And ExpressVPN, the VPN that just works. More information at expressvpn.com/Tom.
We say fight back!
Today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is by Alan J. Lichtman, and it's titled Repeal the Second Amendment, The Case for a Safer America. This from the introduction, titled A Book That Must Be Written. On April 28, 1996, 28-year-old Martin Bryant stopped at an inn near his home of Newtown in Tasmania, Australia, and shot to death its two owners. He then drove to the former penal colony and tourist attraction of Port Arthur, where he lunched at a cafe. After eating, Bryant pulled from his sports bag a semi-automatic rifle with a 30-round magazine that he had legally purchased through a newspaper ad. With no provocation, he began firing at patrons in the cafe and its gift shop. Before the police stopped his shooting spree, Bryant had murdered 35 and wounded 18 others. His motive remains unknown. There were people everywhere, bodies, said witness Lynn Beavis. I thought at the time, being a nurse, I've seen dead people, I've seen blood, I've seen things like this, but what I saw in there, nobody but perhaps a soldier would know what that was like. The leadership of a shocked nation responded to the Port Arthur massacre, not with thoughts and prayers, but with decisive action. The country's conservative-led government rebuffed their gun lobby and its American ally, the NRA, to adopt comprehensive national gun controls. In a 2015 broadside labeled Australia, There Will Be Blood, the NRA charged that those regulations, which Australia significantly tightened as of 2002, have, quote, robbed Australians of their right to self-defense and empowered criminals. If the NRA was right, America, with its lax control over firearms for alleged self-defense, should be one of the world's safest countries, certainly far safer than Australia, where criminals presumably evade gun controls to prey on defenseless, law-abiding citizens. Yet in the latest reporting year, gun homicides claimed 14,542 American lives, compared to 27 in Australia. And all homicides took 19,510 American lives, compared to 222 in Australia. Since the NRA issued its warning, firearm homicides have declined in Australia, while soaring by 3,534 in the U.S. An American is now over 30 times more likely per capita than an Australian to be murdered by a gun, and 7 times more likely to be murdered by any means. If we had rates comparable today to Australia's, some 14,000 American lives would have been saved from firearm homicides in 2017 alone. By the gun lobby's twisted logic, Japan, which has one of the world's strictest gun control laws, should be drenched in innocent blood. Yet out of a population of 127 million, shooters in Japan murdered only 3 persons and injured only 5 in firearm assaults throughout 2017. Australia and Japan are not outliers. As compared to residents of our closest peer democracies in the G7 group of nations plus Australia, an American in 2017 was over 20 times more likely to die from a gun homicide. The gun lobby would have you forget that gun deaths are not limited to murders. In 2017, 23,854 Americans died from gun suicides, 64% more than were killed in firearm homicides. As compared to the peer nations, the 2017 per capita rate of firearm suicides in the United States was 7 times higher, while the rate of suicides by other means was 40% lower. These other democracies all have strict firearm regulations. None has a constitutional right to keep or bear arms, a distinction the United States shares worldwide only with Guatemala, whose gun murder rate is the 3rd highest of some 195 nations worldwide. Why has America lagged behind the democratic world in protecting its citizens from needless death and injury? The culprit is not spending by the NRA on campaigns and lobbying, which other pressure groups exceeded. The real problem is that which gun control advocates fear to name: the Second Amendment. Led by the NRA, the gun lobby exploits a historically defective, perverse reinvention of this amendment to inspire their grassroots supporters, sell guns, and provide constitutional cover for their opposition to making us safer by regulating firearms. The competing movement for gun control has floundered in response to the gun lobby's triumphant marketing of the Second Amendment. Gun control advocates have righteous zeal and noble motives, but lack a winning strategy. Instead of forthrightly refuting the lobby's bogus claims, the gun control movement has instead fallen into the trap of lamely insisting, we support the Second Amendment, but we also support responsible gun control. With such a self-defeating strategy, the movement can never win. It plays on the gun lobby's home turf and fails to rally the American majority that favors stricter firearms regulations. It provokes only scorn from a gun lobby that dismisses yes but assurances as rank hypocrisy, and it ignores the clear history and the true meaning of the Second Amendment itself. The movement for gun control must strike hard with a new strategy. Repeal of the Second Amendment is not only right, but realistic. It would break open the political logjam and open a path for the comprehensive national gun control and safety measures that have eluded the American people for so long. None of these measures would confiscate firearms or stop Americans from using guns for hunting, sport shooting, antique collecting, or legitimate self-defense. A well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of the free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. These form the Second Amendment. The book Repeal the Second Amendment by Alan J. Lichtman.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome back to the second hour of Anything Goes Friday here on the Thom Hartmann Program. I did want to, there's a couple points that I wanted to share with you, a couple stories I wanted to talk about real quickly, and then I'll get back to your phone calls. The first is the breaking news that Steve Bannon, who was subpoenaed to testify before the January 6th committee, who left the Trump White House in 2017, so wasn't even around in 2018, 2019, or 2020 when the January 6th, most specifically 2020, when January 6th was planned and executed, wasn't even around, has said, sorry, I'm not going to show up because Trump's lawyer told me that he's asserting executive privilege. Now, this could play out one of two ways. And his lawyer and Bannon's lawyer said to the committee, we'll go along with whatever the courts say. In other words, what they're asking the committee to do is essentially sue them in the U.S. court system to say you have to comply. And then they'll defend that suit in a district court and or an appeals, you can take it to an appeals court, take it to the Supreme Court. This is exactly what Don McGahn did. And he dragged this thing out for 2 whole years, Don McGahn did, and to avoid testifying before Congress about what Trump was up to. So the January 6th committee has 2 choices. Number one, they can sue and try to use the courts to force Bannon to come in, or they can simply make a criminal referral. Actually, they could also cite inherent contempt. Jamie Raskin is promoting this. I'm not certain how that would play out, and that would certainly land back in the courts, which would drag it out. But they could make a criminal referral to Merrick Garland in the Justice Department and say, Congress has issued a subpoena. This guy is refusing to show up. He says he's got some excuses, but we want him arrested. So the decision is going to lie with, number one, the committee. Do they make a criminal referral? And number two, if they do, with Merrick Garland, does he act on it? And then let Steve Bannon sue the Department of Justice saying, no, wait a minute, you can't come and arrest me. Or when he's out on bail, say, you can't charge me with a crime because I was simply doing what executive privilege allows me to do. A defense, by the way, that I don't think that he will win because he, for no other reason than that he was out of the White House for 3 years. But just thought you should know that is the breaking news as of this moment. And I'm going to be following this. I'll keep you up to date, certainly. But there are two decision points here. What's the committee going to do? How are they going to respond to this? And if they refer it to the Justice Department, as I'm hoping, what will the Justice Department do? And right at this moment, we don't have the answer to either of those two things. The other story that I want to share with you is my rant today from Hartmann Report. And it's titled, The Newest Big Pharma Scam Exposed. Big Pharma's obscenely priced drugs developed with our tax dollars are going to continue to drain working people of their income, their savings, and ultimately their health until America recognizes health care as a right. It's about molnupiravir. This is this new pill that's been all over the news because you just take one pill a day for 5 days. When you first get some COVID symptoms, this is for largely for unvaccinated people. It would work also for vaccinated people, but very rarely do vaccinated people get COVID symptoms. But it's a pill. It doesn't, if you're going to take the monoclonal antibody remdesivir, you've got to go to an infusion center or a hospital or a doctor's office, have a needle put in your vein and sit there for 20 minutes while they drip it into you slowly. This is just a pill you take. It was developed by Emory University with a $10 million grant from the Department of Defense and a $19 million grant from the National Institutes of Health. And it was developed originally to deal with a virus that attacks horses. It's called Venezuelan equine encephalitis. And it's apparently successful for that. And so they thought, hey, this is an antiviral drug. Let's see if it works against COVID. And sure enough, it appears to work. So Emory University passed this patent along to a small company, Ridgeback Biotherapeutics. And then Ridgeback passed that patent along to pharmaceutical giant Merck. According to the Harvard School of Public Health, this new pill will cost $17.74 to manufacture for a 5-day course of treatment. So Merck just signed a contract with the federal government to sell 1.7 million treatment courses. Again, a pill that costs them less than $20 for a treatment course to make. They just signed a contract with our government to sell our government 1.7 million of these courses of treatment that the government will then distribute to infected people for, wait for it, $712 each. Manufactured cost, $17. Sale price, $712. And you and I paid for the development of this drug in the first place. Now, the company is saying, but we paid for testing it on COVID. Well, yeah, of course. This price gouging hustle was made possible and might be illegal, ironically, under a piece of legislation referred to as Bayh-Dole. It was Birch Bayh and Bob Dole, these two senators back in 1980, who got this thing passed over Jimmy Carter's objections. And what it says is that when the federal government funds research in a university, the university may sell that patent to either a nonprofit or a small business. They may not sell it to a large business. So now there's this kind of little industry of small companies like Ridgeback Biopharmaceuticals that buy these patents and then turn around and sell them to the giant companies. But that's not the biggest part. The biggest part of this is that Bayh-Dole contains within it, this piece of legislation contains within it, a provision called march-in authority for the federal government. This is a quote from Peter Arno, and Michael Davis in the Washington Post. Quote, Bayh-Dole is a provision of U.S. patent law that states that practically any new drug invented wholly or in part with federal funds will be made available to the public at a reasonable price. If it is not, then the government can insist that the drug be licensed to more reasonable manufacturers, and if refused, license it to third parties who will make the drug available at a reasonable cost. So now you've got Big Pharma and their lobbyists going to the Trump administration saying, get rid of this march-in authority. And sure enough, Wilbur Ross's Commerce Department proposed in the Federal Register during the Trump administration to eliminate the march-in authority. And that issue is still live before the Biden Commerce Department, so watch this space for that. But meanwhile, Big Pharma is also buying off members of Congress and senators. They've got, they're deeply pouring money into Kyrsten Sinema like there's just no tomorrow to block Biden's Build Back Better plan because it will allow Medicare to negotiate drug prices. And they're also and the same thing in the House of Representatives with the so-called problem solver Democrats like Scott Peters of California, Kathleen Rice of New York State, and Oregon's Kurt Schrader, who all voted against letting Medicare negotiate drug prices. As a result of this, Citizens United, the Supreme Court saying, drug companies can pour unlimited amounts of money down Kyrsten Sinema's throat or Kurt Schrader's or whoever they want. A recent study found, and I quote, for 17 of the 20 top-selling drugs worldwide, drug makers made more money from U.S. sales than from sales to all other countries in the rest of the world combined. More profit in the U.S. than the rest of the world combined. They go on to say for 11 of the 20 top-selling drugs worldwide, U.S. sales revenue is double or more the revenue for sales in the rest of the world. In other words, we pay twice as much or more for 11 of the top 20 drugs being sold worldwide. And this is just obscene. There's no other word for it. It's just obscene. You can read the whole story with the links to the sources and everything else over at HartmannReport.com. I'll pick up your phone calls right after the break. It's 15 minutes past the hour. It's Anything Goes Friday. Just you and me for the rest of the day. Let's take on the issues of the day and do it with vim and vigor. This is the Thom Hartmann Program, the place where despair is not an option. No, I am not going to be paralyzed by despair. Thank you very much. We'll be right back.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
It's Anything Goes Friday. Back with your calls in just a moment. And welcome back. Brett in Seattle. Hey, Brett, what's on your mind today?
Well, I'm curious about your thoughts about Congress placing sanctions on its members, representatives, and senators who refuse to hold town halls.
I think it would be a great idea. There's nothing in law, there's nothing in the Constitution, there's nothing anywhere that requires members of Congress, federal or state for that matter, state legislatures also, to hold town hall meetings or even listen to their constituents. And therefore, for a lot of Republicans, if you call, and some Democrats, if you call their offices, you get voicemail. And that's it. And that's the only way you can communicate with them. Or you can try to send them an email or tweet to them, but, nothing happening. So there is no law like that, Brett. And I sincerely doubt one could pass, given that virtually the entire Republican Party is refusing to respond to their constituents. And there's a good-sized handful of Democrats.
Yes. Okay, thanks.
Yeah, thanks a lot for the call. Morris in Long Beach, California. Hey, Morris, what's on your mind today?
Well, I'll tell you what's on my mind today. We are in an era of first. We're in an era of first. I'm talking about ignoring congressional subpoenas, obstructing public policy, okay? Now, you want to save democracy? We got one tool left, everybody. It's called inherent contempt. Now, I know what the professor said about that in the courts, but here's what I'm saying. Let the sergeant of arms come and pick you up, lock you up, and then let the courts, somebody go to court, try to get you released. Now, they went out there and picked up Steve Bannon out in the ocean someplace some time ago. Now, I don't know who it was that picked him up.
That was the Postal Service.
Who?
It was the Post Office. He was charged with mail fraud.
Okay, well, I don't care who it was, Professor, but they don't have no more influence in the Congressional Select Committee. Okay, so they're going about this the wrong way. You got a sergeant of arms. Let him go pick these people up that don't want to respect these summons. Of course, go ahead and let the Department of Justice do their thing, and then let the courts fight. Let him get a lawyer to fight to get him released from Congress, okay, to make a statement. Because, see, we're playing softball. Those guys are playing hardball. Okay, so if we can go around the world assassinating people, we can go around the world arresting people too. Again, nobody's got more influence than that Congressional Select Committee. If they don't use that tool, you know, I'm not kidding. Democracy could be at risk. If we don't bust these guys right now on this, I mean, gee whiz, Professor, what's left for us?
I'm with you, Morris. I'm completely with you, and that's why I highlighted the fact that, you know, Steve Bannon is saying, no, screw you guys. And, you know, I am hopeful that instead of trying to sue him civilly, which is what they did with Don McGahn, that they instead go to the Justice Department and file a criminal complaint, and then let Bannon try to defend himself against being arrested, as opposed to.
What about
go ahead.
What about my idea? Go pick him up, and then let his lawyer try to get him released.
The last time Congress used inherent contempt was in the 1920s. They did not jail anybody. The Congress does not have a jail. They do have their own police department, you know, the sergeant at arms, but they don't have authority outside the halls of Congress. And I doubt Steve Bannon is going to come to Washington, D.C. and walk into Congress where they could arrest him. I'm very skeptical about inherent contempt, Morris. I think that it should be tried at some point. You know, we need to nail it down because Congress does have that authority, at least in theory. But how it plays out in practice is you know, a hell of a challenge. I would much rather see them go directly to the Justice Department and file criminal charges. Now, maybe Jamie Raskin doesn't think that Merrick Garland has the courage to follow through on criminal charges. They put Susan McDougal in prison for 18 months for refusing to respond to a congressional subpoena about Bill Clinton's sex life. Or actually, it was about Whitewater. It turned into the sex life thing. So, you know, I mean, that's how they should be doing it, in my opinion. Morris, thank you very much for the call. We'll be right back. Share the Thom Hartmann Program with your friends. We're available on SiriusXM, Free Speech TV, Pacifica, commercial stations nationwide, YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, on the Thom Hartmann app, and you can even tell your smart speaker to listen to the Thom Hartmann Program. So the Republican Party has sold themselves way back, all the way back to the 60s, really, as the serious party. We're the party of issues. We take stuff seriously. We have serious policy analysis. We have serious constitutional analysis. We are serious about the economy. We have all these think tanks, Heritage and Competitive Enterprise and Cato, and we've got you know, the Federalist Society finding serious judges that we can put on the federal bench. And in response to 4 dead Americans, they got real serious. You know, 5 House committees, 2 Senate committees. They created a separate House Select Committee for 4 dead Americans. That was Benghazi. Thousands of hours of testimony. The Secretary of State testifying for 8 hours straight. But when 5 people die at the Capitol, not so much. Got a new video about it over at ThomHartmann.com. All righty, let's get into this and pick up your phone calls. Phil in Salinas, California. Hey, Phil, what's up?
Well, I think they ought to just arrest Steve Bannon and put him on a no-bail warrant and let him sit in jail and rot for a little while.
I'm with you.
That's what he is. He's rot.
Yeah, Congress has basically 3 choices right now. The January 6th committee, and it's going to be, I would love to be a fly on the wall as they're debating this, particularly given that you've got a couple of Republicans on that committee, you know, Adam Kinzinger and Liz Cheney. But they have 3 options. They can file a civil lawsuit to try to force him to show up, which is what they did against Don McGahn. And Don McGahn ran out the clock for 2 full years, exactly. You know, fighting in the courts. They can cite inherent contempt, which is a power that Congress has, but hasn't been used since the 1920s. That, you know, and Congress doesn't have its own police force. They've got the sergeant at arms, but I doubt Steve Bannon's going to walk into the Congress and say, "I'm here, arrest me." And they don't even have a jail cell in Congress anymore. They use it to as a storage place for Abraham Lincoln's hearse, you know, for the cart that carried his body. or they can refer a criminal complaint to the Justice Department, which is what they did with Susan McDougal back in the day when Bill Clinton was president and they were investigating Whitewater. The Whitewater Committee subpoenaed Susan McDougal. She was a partner in the Whitewater land deal where Bill and Hillary lost $30,000. They subpoenaed her. She said, I'm not going to come in. I'm not going to show up. And they arrested her. They filed a criminal complaint with the Justice Department. The Justice Department went out and arrested Susan McDougal, and she sat in prison for 18 months for refusing to testify before Congress, if I'm remembering this correctly. It may be that there was a grand jury involved there. I may be slightly off, but in any case, he could be arrested if this goes to the Justice Department, and if Merrick Garland decides he's going to do something. Now, keep in mind, this is the same Merrick Garland, our Attorney General, who wrote a nasty letter to Arizona saying it is a violation of federal law for you to be turning ballots and voting machines over to the cyber ninjas, and then did nothing. And now this is happening in Pennsylvania, and they're doing nothing. I'm frankly very, very disappointed in this Justice Department. They need to be taking names and kicking ass, in my opinion. Jeremiah in Coalport, Pennsylvania. Hey, Jeremiah, what's up?
Hey, Tom. I was wondering if you could give us some insight into the psychology of rich people. When I try to put myself in their shoes, being greedy and not caring that their businesses are destroying the environment and other people's lives, I still have trouble figuring out why they're doing it, because, I know they have bunkers, but, I put myself in their shoes and I think, okay, what if I don't make it to the bunker in time? What if my wife doesn't make it? What if my mistresses don't make it? And then I'm stuck with the same mistresses in this bunker if everything hits the fan.
Jeremiah, here's what I know about this, or what I've read about this, what I've learned about this. As people's wealth goes up, and I'm talking not, somebody making $50,000 now making $90,000, or making $90,000 now making $150,000, or making $20,000 and now making $50,000. It's nothing like that. As people start getting really and truly rich, start making millions of dollars a year and become very wealthy, there's something that changes in their psychology, and it's measurable. One of the really fascinating studies was on who runs red lights and who does not follow traffic rules. And what they found is that, and in fact, actually the major one that they were looking at was antisocial behavior, not just anti-societal behavior, but person-on-person antisocial behavior. In other words, who's more likely to cut in front of you in traffic to make dangerous actions against you. And what they found was that the more expensive the car, the more likely the driver of that car was to engage in antisocial behavior, number one. Number two, there have been numerous studies on this. You can easily, just plug this into any search engine, DuckDuckGo on the web, plug in wealth and empathy. And what you find is that as people's wealth goes up substantially, their ability to identify with other people as being the same as them, to empathize, goes down. And they become more and more insular. And in my opinion, Jeremiah, this is why in the Bible it says the love of money is the root of all evil, why greed in Aboriginal and Indigenous societies all around the world is considered a mental illness, and hoarding is something that can get you shunned or even expelled from a tribal community or an Aboriginal or Indigenous community. That historically, for 3 million years, the way humans lived was we identified greed and hoarding as such a destructive mental illness that it could destroy the tribe, and therefore we excised people like that from our communities. So that's what I know about it, Jeremiah. I think that great wealth, what's the old saying? Power corrupts, and this Lord Acton, I believe it was. Power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. Replace the word power with money, and you've got the same thing. Money corrupts, and massive amounts of money corrupt massively. We'll be back with your calls after this. It's Anything Goes Friday on the Thom Hartmann Program.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
I think this is also why during the pre-Reagan era, when the top tax rate was 74 to 91%, you saw less psychopathic behavior.
Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is Ezra Klein's new book, Why We're Polarized. This is from the introduction, and it's a couple pages into it. I'm starting out here. I have found that American politics is best understood by braiding two forms of knowledge that are often left separate: the direct on-the-ground insights shared by politicians, activists, government officials, and other subjects of my reporting, and the more systemic analyses conducted by political scientists, sociologists, historians, and others with the time, methods, and expertise to study American politics at scale. On their own, political actors often ignore the incentives shaping their decisions, and academic researchers miss the human motivations that drive political decision-making. Together, however, they shine bright light on how and why American politics works the way it does. There's much awry in American politics, and I won't in this book attempt to catalog all of it. But I've come to believe the master story, the one that drives almost all divides and most fundamentally shapes the behavior of participants, is the logic of polarization. That logic, put simply, is this: to appeal to a more polarized public, political institutions and political actors behave in more polarized ways. As political institutions and actors become more polarized, they further polarize the public. This sets off a feedback cycle. To appeal to a yet more polarized public, institutions must polarize further. When faced with yet more polarized institutions, the public polarizes further, and so on. Understanding that we exist in relationship with our political institutions, that they are changed by us and we are changed by them, is the key to this story. We don't just use politics for our own ends. Politics uses us for its own ends. There are many different types of polarization possible, and I'll discuss some of them later in the book, but the locus of polarization I'll discuss is on political identity. And that requires saying a few words about a term that should be very useful in American politics, but that has become almost useless: identity politics. A core argument of this book is that everyone engaged in American politics is engaged in identity politics. This is not an insult, and it's not controversial. We form and fold identities constantly, naturally. Identity is present in politics in the way gravity, evolution, or cognition is present in politics. That is to say, it is omnipresent in politics because it is omnipresent in us. There is no way to read the literature on how humans form and protect their personal and group identities, literature I will survey in this book, and believe that any of us is immune. It runs so deep in our psyches, so activated so easily by even weak cues and distant threats, that it is impossible to speak seriously about how we engage with one another without discussing how our identities shape that engagement. Unfortunately, the term identity politics has been weaponized. It is most often used by speakers to describe politics as practiced by members of historically marginalized groups. If you're black and you're worried about police brutality, that's identity politics. If you're a woman and you're worried about the male-female pay gap, that's identity politics. But if you're a rural gun owner decrying universal background checks as tyranny, or a billionaire CEO complaining that high tax rates demonize success, or a Christian insisting on nativity scenes in public squares, well, that's just good old-fashioned politics. With a quick sleight of hand, identity becomes something that only marginalized groups have. The term identity politics in this usage obscures rather than illuminates. It's used to diminish and discredit the concerns of weaker groups by making them look self-interested, special pleading in order to clear the agenda for the concerns of stronger groups, which are framed as more rational, proper topics for normal political debate. But in wielding identity as a blade, we have lost it as a lens, blinding ourselves in a bid for political advantage. We're left searching in vain for what we refuse to allow ourselves to see. All politics is influenced by identity. Those identities are most powerful when they are so pervasive as to be either invisible or uncontroversial. American is an identity. So too is Christian. When politicians, including the irreligious, end speeches with "God bless America," it's not because they're making an appeal to a higher power, but because they're making an appeal to our bedrock identities. If you don't believe me, ask yourself why there are so few open atheists or even agnostics in national politics. This does not mean that politics is an equation solved by locating identity. Identity shapes our worldview, but it does not mechanistically decide it. And while we often speak of identity as a singular, it is always a dizzying plural. We have countless identities, some of them in active conflict with each other, others lying dormant until activated by threat or fortune. Much that happens in political campaigns is best understood as a struggle over which identities voters will inhabit come election day. Will they feel like workers exploited by their bosses, or heartlanders dismissed by coastal elites? Will they vote as patriotic traditionalists offended by NFL players who kneel during the national anthem, or as parents worried about the climate their children will inhabit? What we are often fighting over in American politics is group identity and status, fights that express themselves in debates over policy and power, but cannot be truly reconciled by either. Health policy is positive-sum, but identity conflict is zero-sum. The book, Why We're Polarized, by Ezra Klein.
Hey, thanks so much for sharing our program and for reaching out to our stations and sponsors and letting them know that you're listening. It really means a lot to us. So for this week's special video, for the supporters of our program that we put up over at ThomHartmann.com, I stepped into the Wayback Machine, and it's really remarkable when you go back over what President Obama accomplished and the Democrats in the House of Representatives and in the Senate, what they accomplished between 2008 and 2010 when they controlled Congress and the White House versus everything that the Republicans blocked. I mean, the Democrats in those 2 years, they saved Chrysler, they saved General Motors, they turned 800,000 monthly job losses into job gains. They increased spending, education spend, decreased the cost of student loans, all kinds of great stuff. But when the Republicans took over, they blocked a veterans job bill, they blocked Wall Street reform, they blocked immigration reform, they blocked political ad disclosure. And this is just a little tip of the iceberg. You can see the whole video over at ThomHartmann.com. And welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you, picking up your phone calls. And Dan in Altoona, Pennsylvania. Hey, Dan, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom. Well, since the political atmosphere is pretty spooky right now, I wanted to call in and see if you wanted to listen to a little bit of a real-life ghost story that I experienced in college, if you have time to listen.
Sure. It's Anything Goes Friday, if it's a brief one, Dan.
I can make it brief. So here's what happened. It was back in 2007. I was in college. I went to Penn State University in State College, Pennsylvania. Living downtown in this new apartment, well, not new apartment building, a new apartment for myself and my little brother. We were sharing with one of our roommates named Dom. And the first couple of days, our heater went. And so pretty much our repairman came over and asked if we started seeing anything weird in our apartment. It was kind of a random thing to say to somebody. So we're like, nah, not really. And so we kept our eyes out, and we just kind of started seeing weird stuff happen in our apartment building. Doors shutting randomly, lights turning off and on, cold breezes that shouldn't be there, just kind of random things. Didn't really think much about it. But one day after class, I came home and there was a bloody tissue on my brother's bed. And so I was like, oh man, somebody must have had a nosebleed, figure out what's going on here. So I called my brother. He was back in our hometown, so he wasn't around. And Dom was back in Philadelphia, where he lived, so nobody was there. So it was just a random bloody tissue on a bed. So I freaked out and was like, somebody must have broke into our apartment. So I called the cops. Cops came, couldn't really do anything, took the bloody tissue for evidence, and didn't hear much about that. But I did talk to my dad and was like, something weird's going on here. So we started doing some research, and while he was doing research, a couple weeks went by, and a couple of my buddies and I were hanging out in my apartment, and the lights turned off, and all the doors in our apartment closed at the same time. It was really spooky. And so my dad called me a couple weeks later, and to the day, it was 30 years, there was a woman that was murdered in my apartment. I guess it was a stalking case that was never solved. And the guy jumped through the kitchen window and stabbed this lady probably like 100 times. And so that got me thinking that we might have a paranormal issue going on in our apartment. And last part of this, my girlfriend at the time, she was staying in our apartment, and we were staying out in the living room because we didn't have air conditioning, so it was the coolest place in the apartment. And I have glasses, so I can't see, but her eyesight was fine. And we woke up in the middle of the night, and there was this white mist that had gone from the kitchen into the back room, and then a door closed. That next morning, my girlfriend left me. She never talked to me again. She freaked out. Wow. And there were butcher knives laying on the kitchen table, all laid out in a row. And I freaked out, and I had not been to that apartment since I moved back in with my parents till we found another apartment. But apparently, this place is kind of renowned for being haunted. So I just thought it would be a nice little,
Yeah, it is October. Halloween is coming. Let me toss mine at you then, Dan. Back when I was a teenager, there are. I moved out of my parents' house when I was 16, and I lived in a series of rooms rented in houses or apartments around Lansing and East Lansing over the following 5 or 6 years until Louise and I moved in together and got married. And there was a friend of mine. His name was Ward, who he was gay and he was taking a lot of crap. He was in a huge battle with his parents about this, and he overdosed on sleeping pills, or on it was the barbiturates actually, Seconal. He overdosed on it and died, and I was one of the people who found his body. And it was in a rented room in a house in downtown Lansing, in a neighborhood where there's probably, within 30 square blocks, there was probably 300 rooms for rent. It was like one of those places where there's a lot of houses. So Ward died in this room in this house, this random room in this random house in Lansing, Michigan, a town, of 250,000 people at that time. About 3 years later, my best friend, Clark, I've told this story on the air before, but not this little twist to it. My best friend Clark this was during the Vietnam War, and he got drafted. And he came home for Christmas and came and visited me and was telling me how bummed out he was that, he was in the Army, but hey, life goes on. And then a couple days later, I get this hysterical call from his wife saying that he just committed suicide. And I'm like, you're kidding. And she's like, come over here right now. And I'm like, where? And she gives me the address, and so I get my car and I drive to where she had rented a room, and when he went off to basic training, and it was the same room in the same house. Oh, he was dead there. He'd blown his brains out with a gun that he had bought at a pawn shop down the street earlier that week. So it's like, I'm with you, Dan, that there's like weird stuff going on in weird places that goes way beyond coincidence, and I don't have any idea how to explain it. But
yeah, I don't think I can either. You just got to leave.
yeah, there you go. Yeah, I've not, I always thought that probably I should keep track of what happens in that house, or, back then, I mean, this was in the late 60s. We didn't have like Google alerts, for a particular address, but I wonder how many people have committed suicide in that room in that house. I mean, it was just totally and Clark was not a suicidal guy. Clark, I mean, obviously everybody says that about their friends who commit suicide, but anyhow, Dan, I got to move along, but thank you for the call. That was a good one. Stacy in Ingram, Michigan, or Wisconsin, excuse me. Hey, Stacy, what's up?
Yeah, I got a concern/question, I guess. With Trump going on and on about how it's fake election is rigged and all this and that. Now, what's going to stop these senators and congressmen from pulling the same thing in 2022 and 2024 once again? I'm just thinking, is bringing in the UN to oversee our elections a possibility if we can't get anything done? I live in Wisconsin. We're the most gerrymandered state probably in the country. Yeah. And then there's nothing we can do about it unless we get our maps changed.
Yeah.
I mean, is that a possibility? Are we going to have to get to that point?
Yeah, in Wisconsin, for example, a majority of people vote for Democrats for the U.S. House of Representatives, yet you're sending a majority of representatives to Washington, D.C. as Republicans.
Absolutely.
And the same thing is true of your House and Senate there.
And they won't let our governor do anything.
Yeah,
they won't let him do anything.
Yeah, and you've got a Democratic governor because it's a statewide office, but you've got a gerrymandered House and Senate. Stacey, the United Nations is not going to save us. They don't have the authority to. They don't have the will to. It's not going to happen. This is something that has to be done from the grassroots up. We have to become politically active. You, if I may, be so bold, as to suggest you and everybody you know need to get inside the Democratic Party in Wisconsin, become active, do everything you can to make sure that as many people as possible, people of goodwill, are registered to vote. Right now, you've got the Koch network, these right-wing billionaire networks, multiple right-wing networks actually, all across the country, mobilizing on the ground. The Koch network itself has a larger budget and more employees than the Republican Party, and they are actively getting people registered to vote. Republicans getting them registered to vote all across America in anticipation of just this kind of thing. Democrats need to be doing the same thing. There is no other way, through this or out of this that I know of. Stacey, thank you for the call. Larry in Soyset, New York. Am I saying that right, Larry?
Close. Syosset.
Syosset. Okay. So what's up?
Perfect. Okay. I have a comment and a question. My comment is my senator, I'm very upset with my senator, Chuck Schumer, who's a nice man. I've met him, and that's the problem. He's too nice. And what we need is a really strong guy who can stand up to Mitch McConnell, and Chuck Schumer isn't it. So my question to you is there a way that we can get him from not being the majority leader and put someone else in?
No.
Is that possible somehow?
I mean, I'm not, wildly enthusiastic about Chuck Schumer either. I think that the communications that come out of his office, I've communicated this to his office through other members of Congress several times. The emails that they send out to the press are long and dry and boring. The statements that they make are like speeches. Schumer's office does not understand bumper sticker politics. It makes me crazy. I've been yelling at them for years about it. And then, of course, he is not standing up to Mitch McConnell and frankly, to Kyrsten Sinema and Joe Manchin in the ways that I think Mitch McConnell would if he had an insurrection like that going on inside his caucus. But when you get to that position of Senate Majority Leader or Speaker of the House, in either case, you have control of an enormous pile of cash that gets funneled through your office to other members of Congress that incentivizes them to keep you in power. So it's damn near impossible, Larry, unless Chuck Schumer decides that he's just going to pull out. Launching any kind of campaign against him, could just be destructive. So I'll just leave it at that.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
It's 45 minutes past the hour. We'll be back with more of your calls in just a moment. And welcome back. Carl in Concord, North Carolina. It says here you disagree with me about the Bayh-Dole Act.
Hi, Tom. Thanks for taking my call. Sure. Yeah, just so you know, I'm a patent attorney, and I have worked for universities for the last 25 years, so I've been real familiar with Bayh-Dole for a quarter of a century now. There's a couple of things in your rant that are slightly off. I mean, one of them is talking about how we can sell patents to people. We don't get to sell the patent to anybody.
I didn't use the word sell. I used the word transfer intentionally. They're typically licensed.
Correct. Yeah, they're licensed. And we could license to large companies. We just have to have a preference for small companies. But the big thing that I'm calling about is about thinking that we might be able to use Bayh-Dole in order to control the prices of the drugs. I'm totally sympathetic to you. I wish we could. But the way that the law is written, it says that the only way that the federal government can march in is if the licensee does not make practical application of the technology. So as long as they have got the stuff available out there in a way that it can be accessed by some people, they meet that. It's a relatively low bar. Even
as it's been interpreted,
Bayh-Dole themselves.
As it's been interpreted. But if I don't know if you saw the article that I wrote about this, but it has links in it.
Yes, I did.
You've got the pharmaceutical industry out there saying, no, march-in authority cannot be used because we're price gouging. You can't do that. And then on the same time, you've got the pharmaceutical industry getting the Commerce Department to explicitly change Bayh-Dole to say that pricing is not a mechanism. Now, why would they do that if it wasn't possible? The argument that was made in the Washington Post back in 2002 by these two professors from, as I recall, Harvard and I forget the other school, that I quote in my article, and there's a link to that article, was that you could interpret Bayh-Dole as explicitly, you could, excuse me, organize my thoughts here. You could interpret pricing as being part of that practical use, or the phrase that you used. Forgive me for not remembering it. And
practical application.
Practical application. Thank you. And the courts have not done that because, to the best of my knowledge, and the best of their knowledge, nobody has asked them to. In other words, the federal government has never tried to use walk-in powers under Bayh-Dole. So nobody really knows. It's never been tested in court.
Right, but if I can make two quick points here. Certainly. One of them is that in response to that article that you quoted, former Senators Bayh and Dole wrote a response.
Oh, I read it.
Published.
I read it.
Yeah,
but that had no legal authority. That was just an opinion.
Well, you could say that it shows legislative intent. I mean, I understand if you
but
like
the courts
and don't believe
frequently ignore legislative intent and say we're going to. In fact, this is Neil Gorsuch's whole thing. Ignore legislative intent. Go with the plain words of the law.
Right. But one other thing that nobody ever seems to talk about here that I think could be used is Bayh-Dole also requires that anything licensed under Bayh-Dole has to be substantially manufactured in the U.S., and I doubt that all of these drugs are being substantially manufactured here.
Oh, that's
so
interesting.
You do have a hook in there.
That's interesting. Carl, thank you for that. Thank you for the conversation, for a thoughtful conversation. I'll have to dig into that, maybe amend my article. Thank you very much, Carl. Good to hear from you. I appreciate it. It's coming up on 10 minutes before the hour. Change starts with you. You can be calling your Democratic or Republican representatives to let them know what you think by calling 202-224-3121. It's the Capitol switchboard. It'll get you right through to them. The media is pushing this crazy narrative that with regard to masks and vaccines and COVID and all this kind of stuff, that America is divided. Like, half of us want masks and half of us don't, or half of us want vaccines. It's just not true. 75% of Americans have received at least one dose of vaccine. 70% of Americans think that we should have mask mandates in all of our schools. Only 17%, this is from the latest Pew studies, polling, only 17% of Americans are opposed to mask mandates in schools. And what we have is this tiny fringe that is being cranked. Now we're learning from China as well as from Russia and perhaps other countries, plus the people in, a relatively small number of people, Trump followers, who think that tearing the country apart is a good thing and somehow it'll hurt Joe Biden and hurt the Democrats in the next election. It's crazy. I got a whole video rant about this over at ThomHartmann.com that you can check out. Continuing with Anything Goes Friday here. Jeff in Fort Worth, Texas. Hey, Jeff, thanks for listening to SiriusXM. What's on your mind today?
Yeah, I'm trying to find it. I'm sure you can Google it, but I'm pretty sure that the 14th Amendment, it might be Article 4. I thought it was Section 4, expressly forbids the questioning of the national debt.
Correct.
And so doesn't that make the debt ceiling unconstitutional on its face?
I believe so. This is Section 4 of the 14th Amendment. The validity of the public debt of the United States authorized by law, including debts incurred for payment of pensions and bounties for services in suppressing insurrection or rebellion, shall not be questioned. So
exactly.
There you go. And I mean,
so
this was all about.
Why doesn't Janet Yellen just say it and dare anybody to challenge her on it?
I have been recommending that for years whenever the debt ceiling is brought up, Jeff. And
I can't quote you where I saw it, but I believe that I heard somewhere that had been done once before.
I believe that I believe it was Richard Nixon, and he threatened to do it. I could be wrong. It was a vague recollection.
It was before. before. It was the early 1900s, if I recall correctly. But
all right.
But I'm just telling you.
Here's the reason why they're not doing it, Jeff. Because if something, that would immediately get thrown to the courts. And the time period from whenever it was that the executive branch asserted that this law was unconstitutional and therefore they're just going to go ahead and pay bills, and the time that the Supreme Court hears the arguments and rules on it is going to be a period of, if it was an emergency, it might be a week or 3. If they don't deal with it on an emergency basis, it could be 6 months. During that time period, the debt of the United States is in doubt, right? Because the whole world is watching going, well, it could go this way, it could go that way. And there's $20 trillion worth of federal debt out there. Now, the federal government owns about $5 trillion of it, but, China owns $1 trillion of it, and et cetera, et cetera. And that debt will just blow up in our faces. The interest rates will go up. People won't be buying Treasury bonds. I mean, just that action in and of itself could be enough. If it's taken when the debt is about to collapse, that action could be the thing that provokes the worldwide Great Depression, that then provokes World War III. The way to do it, in my opinion, and I've written about this before, is for the executive branch to, after the debt ceiling gets raised, when there's no argument or debate about it, at that point, for them to sue, essentially, Congress, although I don't know exactly how this would work, but to essentially sue before the Supreme Court, arguing that this law is unconstitutional under the 14th Amendment, and let it get all worked out over the next 6 months before it's a crisis, so that there's no actual debate about it. Does that make sense?
Well, yes, but wouldn't that be now, since they just raised it until December?
No.
And that gives the court...
No, because they only raised it for a few weeks. They raised it for 6 weeks, or 8 or 10 weeks. That's not enough time to work something through the Supreme Court. And there's still and McConnell is still dangling this sort of Damocles here, over the entire U.S. economy, frankly. So no, it would have to be done. Frankly, the problem is that every time there's a Republican in the White House, this is Jude Wanniski's two Santa Claus theory on steroids. Every time there's a Republican in the White House, they spend like crazy. Donald Trump ran up $8 trillion in debt, and about $2.5 trillion of that came from his tax cuts. But he ran up $8 trillion in debt, and this effort to raise the debt ceiling is to pay off Donald Trump's debt. And whenever there's a Republican in the White House, they just say, oh, debt ceiling, there's no debt ceiling, no problem, more debt, more debt, more debt. Yeah, run it up, make the economy look good, pump the economy as hard as you can. And then as soon as a Democrat comes into office, it's like, put on the brakes on the economy. We got to have a recession. We got to blame it on that Democrat. And if the Democrats try to raise the debt ceiling, or if they try to spend more money, or if they, we got to scream about the national debt. You wouldn't do that in your home, would you? Would you put that money on your credit card? Would you take out a second mortgage? All this hysteria. And they have been doing this since the Reagan administration. Reagan was the first president to fully embrace Jude Wanniski's two Santa Claus theory. He tripled the national debt and dared the Democrats to do anything about it. He by tripling the national debt, he got the country out of what Jerry Ford referred to as stagflation, and Jimmy Carter kind of inherited. He got the country out of that. Sure, it was a huge stimulus. But he also then, ran up the debt. Then George Herbert Walker Bush ran up the debt another $1 trillion or so. And then as soon as Bill Clinton comes into office, the Republicans start getting all hysterical and screaming about the national debt. And what does Bill Clinton do? Sure enough, let's gut welfare. Let's end welfare as we know it. The era of big government is over. And Bill Clinton left office with a balanced budget. He had 2 balanced budgets. There has been no Republican since Dwight Eisenhower who had a balanced budget. And I'm not sure Dwight Eisenhower did, frankly. But you have had two Democratic presidents, Jimmy Carter and Bill Clinton, who have both had balanced budgets as a result of Republicans squealing about this. And, no matter what you give the Republicans, it's never enough and it never satisfies them because they're trying to crash the economy. That's what's going on right now. Mitch McConnell is trying to produce a recession because when the country is in recession, whichever party is in power loses seats in the next election. And there's an election coming up in 13 months, and Mitch McConnell is preparing for that. It's just that simple. We'll be right back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
These companies support the Thom Hartmann Program. They are HelloFresh, the #1 meal kit delivery service. More info at HelloFresh.com, code TOM. CB Distillery, CBD for sleep and pain relief. More info is available at cbdistillery.com, code TOM. Ground News, a well-rounded perspective for news readers. More info at ground.news/Tom. Angie, for any project on your to-do list. More info at Angie.com. Dinovite, a whole food supplement for your pet's immune system. More info at Dinovite.com. And ExpressVPN, the VPN that just works. More information at expressvpn.com/Tom.
For the Thom Hartmann Book Club today, it's Waking the Witch, Reflections on Women, Magic, and Power by Pam Grossman. This is from the introduction. Witches have always walked among us, populating societies and storyscapes across the globe for thousands of years. From Circe to Hermione, from Morgan Le Fay to Marie Laveau, the witch has long existed in the tales we tell about ladies with strange powers who can harm or heal. And although people of all genders have been considered witches, it's a word that is now usually associated with women. Throughout most of history, she has someone to fear, an uncanny other who threatens our safety or manipulates reality for her own mercurial purposes. She's a pariah, a persona non grata, a boogie woman to defeat and discard. Although she's often been deemed a destructive entity, in actuality, a witchy woman has historically been far more susceptible to attack than an inflictor of violence herself. As with other terrifying outsiders, she occupies a paradoxical role in cultural consciousness as both vicious aggressor and vulnerable prey. Over the past 150 years or so, however, the witch has done another magic trick by turning from a fright into a figure of inspiration. She is now as likely to be the heroine of your favorite TV show as she is its villain. She might show up in the form of your Wiccan co-worker or the beloved musician who gives off a sorceress vibe in videos or on stage. There's also a chance that she is you, and that witch is an identity you've taken upon yourself for any number of reasons, heartfelt or flippant, public or private. Today, more women than ever are choosing the way of the witch, whether literally or symbolically. They're floating down catwalks and sidewalks in gauzy black clothing and adorning themselves with Pinterest-worthy pentagrams and crystals. They're filling up movie theaters to watch witchy films and gathering in back rooms and backyards to do rituals, consult tarot cards, and set life-altering intentions. They're marching in the streets with Hex the Patriarchy placards and casting spells each month to try to constrain the commander-in-chief. Year after year, articles keep proclaiming it's the season of the witch, as journalists try to wrap their heads around the mushrooming witch trend. And all of this begs the question, why? Why do witches matter? Why are they seemingly everywhere right now? What exactly are they? And why the hell won't they go away? I get asked such things over and over, and you would think that after a lifetime of studying and writing about witches, as well as hosting a witch-themed podcast and being a practitioner of witchcraft myself, my answers would be succinct. In fact, I find that the more I work with the witch, the more complex she becomes. Hers is a slippery spirit. Try to pin her down and she'll only recede further into the dark, deep wood. I do know this for sure, though. Show me your witches, and I'll show you your feelings about women. The fact that the resurgence of feminism and the popularity of the witch are ascending at the same time is no coincidence. The two are reflections of each other. That said, this current witch wave is nothing new. I was a teen in the 1990s, the decade that brought us such pop culture as Buffy the Vampire Slayer, Charmed, and The Craft. Not to mention riot girls and third-wave feminists who taught me that female power could come in a variety of colors and sexualities. I learned that women could lead a revolution while wearing lipstick and combat boots, and sometimes even a cloak. But my own witchly awakening came at an even earlier age. Morganville, New Jersey, where I was raised, was a solidly suburban town, but it retained enough natural land features back then to still feel a little bit scruffy in spots. We had a small patch of woods in our backyard that abutted a horse farm, and the two were separated by a wisp of running water that we could cross via a plank of wood. When we were little, my older sister Emily and I would sometimes venture to the other side where we could feed the horses, an act that still scares me to this day, and pick fistfuls of clover. But the majority of our time was spent on our side of the stream, threading ourselves through the thicket of trees that served as our personal forest. In one corner of the yard, a giant puddle would form whenever it rained, surrounded by a border of ferns. We called this spot our magical place. That it would vanish and then reappear only added to its mystery. It was a portal to the unknown. These woods are where I first remember doing magic, entering that state of deep play where imaginative action becomes reality. I would spend hours out there creating rituals with rocks and sticks, drawing secret symbols in the dirt, losing all track of time. It was a space that felt holy and wild, yet still strangely safe. As we age, we're supposed to stop filling our heads with such nonsense. Unicorns are to be traded in for Barbie dolls, though both are mythical creatures to be sure. We lose our tooth fairies, walk away from our wizards. Dragons get slain on the altar of our youth. Most kids grow out of their magic phase. I grew further into mine. My grandma Trudy was a librarian at the West Long Branch Library, which meant I got to spend many a long afternoon lurking between the 001.9 and 135 Dewey Decimal sections, reading about Bigfoot and dream interpretation in Nostradamus. Waking the Witch by Pam Grossman.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
And welcome back to Anything Goes Friday. Just a couple of quick stories here for you. Activists demand that AT&T sever their ties with One America News, OAN, this right-wing television network. It turns out that, and this is totally weird, AT&T owns DirecTV. DirecTV carries One America Network, and apparently AT&T or John Stankey, the CEO, or one of the people there, had a lot to do with getting One America Network on DirecTV. It's one of the two big satellite, Dish and Direct, two big satellite TV providers. And Free Speech TV is also on DirecTV, and Free Speech TV actually pays DirecTV to carry for carriage, to be on the network. But DirecTV pays OAN to be on the network. It's the exact opposite. We pay them, but with a right-wing network, they pay the network. And I'm still scratching my head on this one. So now you've got one of the nation's leading women's group, Ultraviolet, just issued this press release saying if John Stankey, he's the CEO of the world's largest communications company, AT&T, if John Stankey is unwilling to correct this course by severing ties with OAN, firing anti-abortion extremist Ed Gillespie. Ed Gillespie is a vice president now with AT&T, and he used to be the head of the Republican Party, and pledging to stop funding right-wing racist and anti-woman politicians. He should step down. And they go on to say, the leadership and tenure of now CEO and former COO John Stankey at AT&T is marked by his enabling of the radical right-wing conspiracy platform One America News and the funding for anti-choice politicians behind Texas's dangerous abortion ban. AT&T has pushed back, saying, we don't have a financial interest in One America News and do not fund OAN, but they do pay them to be on the network, which is weird. NAACP President and CEO Derek Johnson, in a public statement, said, we are outraged to learn that AT&T has been funneling tens of millions of dollars into OAN since the network's inception. AT&T has, as a result, caused irreparable damage to our democracy. The press should inform the American public with facts, not far-right propaganda and conspiracy theories. So watch this space. That's an absolutely fascinating one. And it'll be interesting to see how much blowback there is. How many people who have AT&T telephone service, for example, switch to T-Mobile or Sprint or Verizon or something else. Keep your eye on this. One other story here I wanted to share with you that I think is just absolutely fascinating. The two-term Oklahoma superintendent of public instruction. Now, in the state of Oklahoma, this is the person who's like in charge of all schools in the state, and it's a statewide elected position. This person is a Republican, and her name is Joy Hoffmeister. She's a Republican. She's been elected twice to statewide office as the superintendent of instruction in Oklahoma. And she just flipped parties from Republican to Democratic and said that she's going to run against the Governor Stitt, Kevin Stitt. She's going to run against him in the election next year. She says through extremism, partisanship, ineffective leadership, he is hurting our education system, our healthcare system, and our infrastructure. She's a lifelong Republican. And, what she's objecting to, he has pushed a bill that would ban school districts from requiring students to wear masks. Stitt's appointees to the Oklahoma State Board of Education ignored her objections by voting to only make its coronavirus school response plan voluntary. She says, when somebody said, well, what would you do different from Governor Stitt if you became governor? And she said, when you understand how critical it was to have had a leader who contemplated expert advice and opinion and set an example to protect Oklahomans, we could have avoided thousands of people dying. I wouldn't have churned through 4 state epidemiologists in the middle of a pandemic. This is the first statewide elected official anywhere to switch parties while in office since 2018. And she just became a Democrat, which tells me that in bright red Oklahoma, which tells me that the Republican Party is in some trouble right now between the Trump get sick and die wing and the old Republican, Main Street, let's get in bed with corporations and hate unions, but hey, we don't want people to die wing. The Liz Cheney wing versus the Matt Gaetz wing. By the way, the reports are coming out that Matt Gaetz is playing good hubby now to avoid all his sex trafficking charges. Amazing stuff. I've got a crazy alert for you about Franklin Graham, too. I'll share that with you at the bottom of the hour. But right now, let's pick up some of your phone calls. A whole bunch of people have been waiting to jump in. Larry in Los Angeles. Hey, Larry, thanks for listening to us on TuneIn. What's up?
Hi. I wanted to talk about the jobs report.
Mm-hmm.
The 194,000 jobs for September is actually a higher number than Donald Trump averaged for his first 3 years before the pandemic. So
correct.
Biden's 194 during the pandemic is higher than what Donald Trump averaged before the pandemic. And they've adjusted the number for the previous month to 366,000 in August. That would have been Donald Trump's second highest number ever.
Right, but that's not the story the media is carrying. I agree with you. In fact, I believe it was Institute for well, I'm not sure which think tank. I got an email from one of the progressive think tanks this morning saying that these are actually great numbers when you dig into them and you find that actual private sector employment is up way above that number because public sector employment has gone down by a couple 100,000. And part of that is in schools. You've got teachers leaving schools, presumably because of the pandemic. They don't want to face that. You've got some police departments that have had attrition. You've got other, government positions that people are leaving. There's just a whole bunch of pieces to this, but that it's actually not a bad news story, Larry.
When you take into consideration COVID, every time COVID deaths go up, the number of people seeking jobs drops. In the case of Donald Trump, his first spike saw 20,000 jobs lost in the next month, and then he had another spike in December of 2020 that saw 300,000 jobs lost. Those are the two losses that he had, really big losses that he had. They occurred when spikes occurred. We just went through a spike for August and September. Biden's numbers stayed positive. And every time we have a situation where the American people think they can do something about COVID, like when we started wearing masks, that caused people to go back to work when Donald Trump was president. And then when he got the vaccine in the last month of his office, again, people started going back to work, and his last month was a positive month. Mm-hmm. And Biden's months have been positive ever since the vaccine has come in. And then we had this spike that Biden was able to survive, and now the pill might start coming in. And numbers are going down already, even before we get the pill. Yeah. So if Biden's numbers...
Go ahead.
If Biden can see the deaths drop back down to less than 200 for the whole American population, I expect to see somewhere between 700 to 1 million jobs for several months in the next 3 to 4 months.
I think you're absolutely right, Larry. I found the press release. This is from the Center for Economic Policy, CEPR, Center for Economic Policy and for Economic and Policy Research. CEPR.org or .net, is their website. This is by Dean Baker. And he said, first, the private sector employment rose by a respectable 317,000 following August's 332,000. He said the biggest surprise is a drop of 123,000 in state and local government employment, putting September level $874,000 below, or not dollars, employees below the pre-pandemic level. And he said it's hard to understand since most schools are open in state and local. And then he goes into, why. And wage growth has remained strong. He said the low-paying industries are shedding jobs. Nursing home employment fell by 15,800. Well, that may be because a lot of people in nursing homes died, and there's just not demand. He said.
And the thing about worker.
Go ahead.
The thing about worker participation, there are a lot of people who got COVID. 45 million Americans.
Yeah.
Long-term COVID is has probably really cut a big dent into the worker participation. So those numbers are probably never going to come back up because those people just don't feel well enough to go back to work.
Yeah, I agree.
So when you take all this into consideration, Biden's numbers really are pretty good.
Yeah, and, I'm with you, Larry. I'm with you. You're the numbers guy, but you're agreeing with Dean Baker and the numbers guy, the professional economists over at CEPR. I'm with you, Larry. Thank you very much. Spot on. But the media will figure out a way to say, woe is me. It's a terrible thing. Terrible job numbers. Quack, quack, quack. No, it's really not all that bad. We'll be right back at 16 minutes past the.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
In fact, given the last 2 years that we've been through, it's actually quite good. It's a positive number. There are 300,000 plus jobs in the private sector. Yeah, it's a very positive number. And welcome back. Lee in Sepulveda, California. Hey, Lee, what's on your mind today?
What's on my mind is cutting Donald Trump off at the knees for 2024. And I'll tell you how we do it. Mm-hmm. However, not literally. Yeah, politically. What they did with MAGA, all that hubbub around Make America Great Again and all that, bumper stickers and all that stuff, that's advertising that's valuable. So if we take the insurrection on January 6th coming up and we make a holiday out of it, everybody. We have our hats, we have our banners, we have our stuff, and we do it every year for 3 years. By 2024, he will be nothing. If the people in this country who are opposed to Donald Trump and all that he did, and McConnell and all the rest of them, if we can get together in that way, like the MAGA people did, we can.
You're talking, I assume, Lee, about celebrating the fact that we defeated a coup attempt. Is that the point that you're making? Because because if you make that a holiday, they're going to claim it as their holiday and say we're celebrating the coup attempt itself.
No, insurrection. The defeat of the insurrection, like we should celebrate the defeat of the Civil War. Yeah. We shouldn't let them get away with, going, well,
but there is no holiday for the end of the Civil War.
Nonsense. I know, that's the point. We should emerge them and say, yes, we're winning this thing. We never get any positives. Yeah. All we get is flack from those goofballs.
Yeah, there should, and in fact, looking back, there probably should have been a holiday for the end of the Civil War. I mean, it just occurred to me that was a huge victory, and
absolutely, yeah.
But I'll bet it never happened because Andrew Johnson, would have been the guy to make it happen, and he was, he was a Southerner and a slave owner.
Yeah, well, we can do this, and we can just stomp out MAGA hats. We can have all of our own Donald Trump Insurrection Day hats.
Yeah, I get it. Okay, thanks a lot for the call, Lee. Good to hear from you. Yep, Jessica in Chicago. Hey, Jessica, thanks for watching Free Speech. What's up?
Hi, Tom. I agree with you. We need criminal referral for these people who are going to violate their subpoenas.
Yep.
And last week when I called, I did give you the DOJ's comment line. Mm-hmm. I have those two numbers. People can look them up online, but I can say one real quick because I call and leave comments. It's area code 202-353-1555, and that's for, just the comment line, but I think it helps because I called and I say it's time for Merrick Garland to be strong. He has the power and he has the law to indict, and the federal law is 18 U.S.C. 610. It's the code.
Well, there's also 1823-84, which is seditious conspiracy.
Yes. And Glenn Kirshner was saying that's at least 3 years in prison for that felony. Yep. So Trump was bold enough to do all this crime in plain sight.
Well, seditious conspiracy has up to 20 years, Jessica. I mean, there's several laws that these guys can be prosecuted under.
Right, but I just want him to be strong. I want him to start doing something.
I'm with you. Yeah.
I call.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you, Jessica. Jessica, I'm sorry, I got to run, but thank you very much. We'll be right back. Missed my opening rant today? It's usually published over at HartmannReport.com, where you can read it and share it with your friends for free. Check it out, HartmannReport.com. So there are actually some substantial differences between the Taliban, the Afghanistan Taliban, the group that has, that Donald Trump signed what his Secretary of State his Defense Secretary and his National Security Advisor referred to as surrender documents to back in early 2020. There's a difference between the Taliban and ISIS, or even K-ISIS, which is how they're identifying the ISIS group that has emerged in Afghanistan. The main difference is that the Taliban's ambitions are largely confined to Afghanistan. They want to be a regional force. They were the government of Afghanistan before. They want to be the government of Afghanistan again. ISIS, on the other hand, wants to reestablish the entire caliphate across the Middle East, across Northern Africa, across parts of Southern Europe. And this is going to bring these two into conflict. I've got a whole video about this over at ThomHartmann.com for folks who support the program. Check it out. And welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. And Bill in Clifton, New Jersey. Hey, Bill, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom. I don't know. I keep taking these deep dives into Roman history, and I'm loving it. I tried to find the roots, the very roots of conservatism, and I got back to the Romans and their concept of mas mariam. I don't know if you're familiar with that.
I'm not.
Okay, it means the way of our ancestors, and what they said was that the way of our ancestors, and that anything that is different, anything that's different from the way our ancestors did things was wrong. In other words, they said all new that is done contrary to the usage and customs of our ancestors seems not to be right. Now, this was not in law, but this was the theme, and it was all based on the family, which was patriarchal, and family actually didn't mean people, it meant household. In other words, it was an organization, and it was a hierarchy.
Yeah, you know,
and
Aristotle wrote a whole treatise on how to run your family, including multiple paragraphs about how to supervise slaves. These were slave societies, Bill. It's which is pretty amazing. I mean, that was the Greeks, not the Romans, but still. Anyway.
But I think it's still true today, though. I mean, it's anything that's different from before is conservatism, and they're against it.
Oh, sure.
And it's based on nothing. I mean, it's not based on ideas or anything like that. It's just a negative thing. It's like, you know, it's not so much that liberals are so good. It's that conservatives are so backwards and not forward thinking. And I don't think.
Well, I would say, wary of change would be a better way to describe it. I'm not sure that it should be necessarily described as a pejorative. You're talking about traditional conservatism as opposed to what the Republican Party is engaging in, which is radical and reactionary neo-fascism.
Well, every time there's cultism involved, it changes everything, like the Nazis and everything else, as compared to being fascist. But I found it pretty interesting. And also, I dug really far back, and I didn't realize in 500 BC, when Rome was still a republic, they had kings. But the kings were elected by the Senate, and the kings did not go by genetics. If they didn't like the king, they sent him into exile. Right. When one king died, they voted on a new king. And then they got really pissed off at the whole thing when the last king raped one of the Vestal virgins and claimed it was a virgin birth and that person should be the new king. And they just threw him out of there and had no kings at all until Caesar came in.
That's interesting.
And in the meantime, the only reason they had a king is they said, well, we need a leader at some point if there's a war. So what they decided to do is the two censors who ran the government, every month they would pass the fascia back from each other, and one would hold power. They decided that if there's a war, there's a problem, they will elect somebody to be the dictator to run the country on emergency powers when there's a problem.
Yeah, I'm familiar with that. Bill, are you reading Gibbon's Rise and Fall of the Roman Empire, or are you? There's a newer one that I read last year. In fact, I think we had the author on, but I'm forgetting the name of it, and so is Sean, right? About the Roman Republic.
No, I'm not reading it. Just going through the internet and finding real sources.
Because Gibbons is generally considered the authoritative source, the rise and fall of the Roman Empire. But this new author, I think it's called Fragile Republic or something like that. It's very much like that. It's some kind of modifying word to the word republic. But I'm sorry, it's been a couple of years since I read it, but it was absolutely fascinating. And the parallels, I reference it in my book on oligarchy, actually. The parallels between the Roman Republic in its last days as it led up to Augustus and the Trump administration are shocking. Bill, thanks for the call. It's great to hear from you. We'll be right back.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
It's Anything Goes Friday. I got a crazy alert for you on the other side of the break, and then back to your calls. Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is Richard Wolff's Understanding Socialism. This is from the introduction. Socialism is a kind of yearning for a better life than what capitalism permits for most people. Socialist yearnings are as old as capitalism itself because they are its products. Where and when capitalism's problems and failings have accumulated criticism and critics, socialist voices have arisen. And so it is again now. Any serious discussion of socialism must begin by acknowledging socialism's rich diversity. Whatever particular aspect of socialism we choose to analyze, they need to be located within socialism's complexity. That avoids presenting one's own interpretation as if it were the entirety of socialism. In this book, I focus on the economic aspects of socialism, how it differs from capitalism in broad outlines. I'm more interested in socialist critiques of capitalism and their implications about socialist alternatives than in the particulars of the few early experiments in erecting socialist systems, USSR, People's Republic of China, and so on, that history so far offers. Finally, my own education and work constrain me to concentrate on Western Europe and North America. Some important aspects of socialism are thus not covered or discussed here. Yearnings for better lives, such as socialism proposes, are not new. In slave societies, the slaves hoped and dreamed of lives less hard and less out of their own control. Their yearning aimed to obtain freedom. They sought social change that would preclude any one person being the property of another. In feudal societies, the serfs, free in the sense that no one owned them, yearned for better lives too. Their subordination to lords included heavy labor and other burdens that they wanted lifted. They hoped and dreamed of a society in which they would not be bound to the land, the lord of that land, and the feudal dues of labor and subservience. The serfs mobilized in the 1789 French Revolution to demand liberty, equality, and brotherhood. In effect, the serfs had expanded on what the slaves had called freedom. In the American Revolution against British King George III, the revolutionaries were neither slaves nor serfs. They were mostly self-employed farmers, craftspeople, and merchants subject to a foreign feudal kingdom. They wanted liberty as individuals to pursue their dreams without hindrance from feudalism or monarchism, whether foreign or domestic. They added democracy to the goals advanced by the slaves and serfs before them. The different systems of slavery, feudalism, and small-scale self-employment produced masses of people yearning for better lives. Eventually, each of those systems provoked revolutions. Many people then sought to break away from and go beyond those systems. The French and American revolutions marked key moments in the social transformations of major pre-capitalist systems into capitalist ones. By capitalist system, we mean that particular organization of production in which the basic human relation is employer-employee instead of master-slave, lord-serf, or individual self-employment. The revolutionaries who wanted and built capitalism hoped and believed the transition to employer-employee relations of production would bring with them the liberty, equality, brotherhood, and democracy they had yearned for. The revolution's leaders promised to themselves and to the people they led that those goals would be achieved. But the transition to capitalist employer-employee relations that increasingly replaced the previous slave, feudal, and self-employment relations of production had unintended consequences. Capitalism soon proved to be different from what its revolutionaries had hoped. While it enabled some people to be more free and more independent than slaves, serf, or self-employed subjects of monarchies had been, it also seriously limited freedom, independence, and democracy for many. Capitalism betrayed many of the promises made by its advocates. It produced and reproduced great inequalities of income and wealth. Poverty proved to be as endemic as capitalism seemed equally adept at producing and reproducing both wealth and poverty. The capitalist rich used their wealth to shape and control politics and culture. Democratic forms hid very undemocratic content. The cyclical instability attending capitalism constantly threatened and hurt large numbers of people, and so on.
Growing numbers of employees within capitalism began to yearn for better lives. They defined those yearnings first in the familiar terms of the earlier French and American revolutions: equality, fraternity, liberty, and democracy. They criticized a capitalism that failed to deliver those to most people and demanded social changes to achieve them. Many people still continue to want a better, softer, friendlier capitalism, where government regulates and intervenes to achieve more of what the French and American revolutionaries had yearned for and promised. They are also often self-defined as socialists. However, capitalism's development provoked another, different perspective that also called itself socialism. In that view, capitalism had not broken from slavery, feudalism, and monarchy nearly as much as its advocates had imagined. Slavery had masters' slaves, feudalism had lords' serfs, and monarchy had king subjects as their key sources of their inequalities, lack of freedom, oppressions, and conflicts. The employer-employee relation of production and capitalism generated parallel problems. Capitalism installed monarchies inside individual workplaces, even as monarchies outside workplaces were rejected. Kings mostly disappeared, but inside workplaces, the owners or their designated boards of directors assumed king-like powers. The book Understanding Socialism by Richard Wolff. Our 1-hour free podcast recaps our show, and it's available wherever fine podcasts are found. And we have the full 3-hour podcast available over at thomhartmann.com if you want to really support our program.
So Rand Paul is now echoing Louis Gohmert. Remember Louis Gohmert back in the day, back in the after 9/11, when he was talking about terror babies. There's Muslims coming to the United States to have babies who will be citizens, and we can't kick them out anymore. And then they're going to grow up and they're going to be terrorists. Yeah, and we all kind of laughed at Louis Gohmert. So now Rand Paul is talking about how the Biden administration is taking kids from down at the border who may have it, COVID, and they're plucking them up and putting them all over the United States as if they're wishing to seed the country with a new variant. Right. But that's not half of it. Then he goes on to say that, for him, quote, the bottom line for those who are saying I won't go to a restaurant unless everybody's vaccinated, he says, mind your own business. Well, Rand, it is our business. Public health is all of our businesses. I've got a whole new rant about Rand Paul's bizarre take on the public good over at thomhartmann.com. It's a video. You can check it out there. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. Crazy alert. Franklin Graham, it's communism for the FBI to investigate school boards. Yes, seriously. School boards. Now, we have school boards in Virginia, Arizona, Connecticut, Michigan, Pennsylvania, Louisiana, Wisconsin, Illinois, and Vermont who have so far reported officially death threats and clear examples of violent intimidation in those states. So what is this religious hustler, Franklin Graham, who's running ads on TV saying, are you having a tough time? Call this number and we'll pray with you. And then we'll ask you for money for the rest of your life. Oh, he's not saying the last part. It's just what happens. But anyhow, Franklin Graham it comes out and says, and I quote, it's an ominous sign when the government uses its power to try to silence the voice of the people. Keep in mind, he's talking about people who are showing up at school board meetings and threatening people. I know where you live. I'm coming for you. He said, it's an ominous sign when the government uses its power to try to silence the voice of the people. That's how communism works. Anyone who speaks against communism or the goal of communism becomes the enemy. So let me get this straight. Parents or people, in fact, a lot of these people showing up at these school board meetings are not even parents. They're just local QAnon folks. People showing up at school board meetings, yelling and screaming and threatening school boards that they don't think children should wear masks are fighting communism in Franklin Graham's mind. He says, anyone who speaks against communism or the goals of communism becomes the enemy. And we're seeing this happen right in our own country. The Biden administration, which bows to the radical progressive left, would like to silence parents who voice strong opinion. Really? He said this tactic of intimidation is meant to silence parents with views the left doesn't agree with. We cannot let the government take over the parenting of our children. Really? He goes on to say, if anti-woke, anti-socialism, anti-communism citizens like us do not speak up, get involved, and take a stand to preserve what we have in this country, it will disappear right before our eyes in just one generation. Amazing. And it's just amazing. I see his ads on TV, and it's like, oh my God, I know what a scam these guys are. I used to work in radio. You know, there's radio stations that lease their stations to these religious broadcasters, and, you know, by the hour. And so let's say they're selling their time for $300 an hour to a religious show. So that religious show has to bring in more than $300 an hour to pay for it. And so, you know, they spend half the show begging for money. And if they can bring in $500 an hour or $600 an hour, they just keep doing it and they stay on the air. It's a business, except that it's entirely exempt from taxation. You and I are subsidizing it. Amazing. Anyhow, Warren in Madison, Wisconsin. Hey, Warren, it's Anything Goes Friday. What's on your mind?
Tom, how are you, sir?
I am alive and well.
Excellent. I just wanted to bring to light the amount of UFO activity I'm seeing here in Wisconsin. It's amazing. You could practically look up any given night in Wisconsin and see what look like stars, but they're not because they move around. And
those are probably satellites, Warren.
Well, they're so close to the Earth itself, to the ground. I mean, I'm sitting down back in June, looking at fireworks with a friend of mine out in a rural area just west of Madison here, and I always look for the constellation Orion. So I'm looking for his belt, you know, the 3 stars in a row. Mm-hmm. So I'm thinking I'm looking at it, and the middle star, actually, Tom, starts scooting across the sky, came directly above me and my friend, and it just lit up like the sun. It was crazy.
Whoa.
And just...
What if it's a meteorite?
No. This is controlled motion and movement.
Interesting.
Definitely.
You know, Nigel Peacock and I, one day, we were driving in England in the evening. This must have been 10, 15 years ago. Nigel was driving, and we were passing the area where Stonehenge is. And there was this light and it was a dark night, and we were on the freeway, on the motorway, and so there's not a lot of light pollution. You could see the sky really clearly. And this light, that, like you described, it looked bright like a star. I assumed at first it was like an airplane. It goes, kind of shooting across the sky, and then it stops and makes like a left turn and goes shooting off in another direction. It's like, whoa, what did we just see? And,
absolutely.
You know, it's like, I don't know. It's probably a military plane, but it was a hoot to think that it might have something to do with, with UFOs, because it was Stonehenge, right?
Yeah, well, that's true, Tom. But you can, earthbound aircraft don't use the trajectories that these UFOs do. And right quick, last Saturday, I was visiting another friend of mine just on the north side of Madison here in Wisconsin. And we're out there, we're talking, walking the dog. Cloudy night last Saturday. I look up, I know I'm not expecting to see any stars, and I see a 3-tiered light off in the distance. And this was a huge ship. It was huge. So I told her, I said, look up there, there's a UFO. And she looked up, and it got brighter, and then it faded off into the clouds and turned the lights off. It was amazing.
Weird.
Yeah,
okay,
so
Warren, it is October. It's like we're getting ready for Halloween here.
This is true. It's one of those things, Tom. But people need to look up once in a while.
Yeah, I'm with you. Warren, thank you for the call. That's fascinating. Larry in Elkhart, Kansas. Hey, Larry, what's on your mind today?
Hi. Hey, fact. Nothing is as important as stopping the rampant destruction of our biosystems, in my opinion.
I'm with you.
And a quick quote from The Guardian yesterday. Robert Walker, a quantitative geographer at the University of Florida's Center for Latin American Studies, has said that unless something unprecedented happens, he predicts that the great rainforest, the greatest rainforest on Earth, the Amazonian rainforest, will be wiped out by 2064. That is wild. That is nuts. That is scary. That
it's
is
losing
crazy.
something like 80,000 acres a day. I mean, it's amazing how rapidly it's going.
In the article, they said, excuse me, I'm sorry. In the article, they said 200,000.
200, yeah, okay.
God.
May well be. I'm running from memory here. But it's huge.
Point is, who is going to do something about that? I mean, what are we supposed to do? Everyone's enraged except people who...
Now, Jair Bolsonaro, you know, the Trumpy president of Brazil, has been giving away rainforest to his big donors for them to go in and turn it into agricultural land or to drill for oil, you know, wiping out indigenous people, destroying biosphere. He claims that, you know, climate change is a hoax, you know, just like Viktor Orban of Hungary, you know, who says climate change is a hoax manufactured by Barack Obama. I'm with you, Larry. We have to do something. The question is, how do you most effectively act? And I think that we have to understand that the mechanism by which we act is important as well as what we do. And that, in my mind, that mechanism should be democracy. That, you know, we as a people should say, okay, we're going to do something about this and collectively, and we should, you know, discuss it and debate it honestly. But our democracy right now, because the Supreme Court has allowed the fossil fuel industry to own politicians like Joe Manchin, our democracy is not working. And, you know, and therefore our ability to do something about global warming is not working. And our ability to do anything about what's going on in Brazil is pretty much non-existent. You know, you would hope that the UN would do something about that. But I'm with you. I'm very concerned about it. I don't have an easy answer. Larry, thank you for the call. Mary in St. Paul, Minnesota. Hey, Mary, what's up?
Yeah, I wanted to get your input on, I keep hearing Republicans saying that Portland was such a mess during the George Floyd protests, you know, still asking whether they ever got the city back, quote unquote. Mm-hmm. So what did it look like down there during the George Floyd protests?
There was an area of 10 or 12 square blocks that was kind of a regular conflict zone, and some of the stores, like there's an Apple store down there that just, you know, basically built a wall around the store. They were putting up fences and things. There was the federal building. It had been heavily spray painted, you know, tagged, graffitied. And it looked like a war zone. And so the Trump administration put a barrier around it and left it that way. So that became the spot where Fox News always did their photography. But, you know, a lot of that has been cleaned up. There's a report that literally just came out this week. There's a great summary of it in the Oregonian. OregonLive.com is the website for our statewide newspaper. That suggesting that Trump sent basically Border Patrol guys, you know, Customs and Border Patrol and Homeland Security guys to here to Portland to help the Portland police bash heads. And it was just a mess. These guys didn't know what they were doing. They were violating people's legal rights left and right. They were engaging in police brutality. They were kidnapping people off the streets, which is, you know, the federal government kidnapping you off the streets. You know, that's what Pinochet did in Chile, you know, and some really terrible stuff. But the city is putting itself back together. I'm not happy with the speed at which they're doing it, but they're doing it. And so it's not, you know, Portland's a pretty livable place. I mean, every city in America right now is having some challenges. Nothing anywhere near as bad as the 80s or 90s, though.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
We'll be back. It's 46 minutes past the hour. And welcome back. Tom in Marquette, Michigan. Hey, Tom, what's up?
Hey, Tom, thanks a lot for taking my call, and thank you very much for your show. It's really great.
Sure.
I'm calling about the oil spill in California, but we in Michigan here are concerned about two anchor strikes of the Line 5 pipeline near the Mackinac Bridge. I was a paper boy in Royal Oak, Michigan, and when John Kennedy was assassinated. And it struck me as odd that 1 in the afternoon we hear of the news of John Kennedy's assassination, and I'm the paper boy for the Detroit News, delivering the newspapers at 4 and 5 and 6 o'clock, saying, "Lone gunman kills president." And so what I'm bringing up is something that's related to the oil spill in California. It seems like the initial call on how much oil was leaked out of the pipes was impossible to estimate.
Right.
And they said 2 different reports. One was there's a 13-inch hole in the pipe. And the other one said there's a 13-inch hole in the pipe stretching 1,000 feet.
It was a 13-inch pipe, wasn't it? I mean, that's where the
No, it's a 13-inch hole. No, It's a 13-inch hole. Okay. And so they covered up how big the hole is by saying, well, it's only a 13-inch hole. Well, if it spans 1,000 feet, we're talking about hundreds of square feet of breakage. And so my concern is that the initial reports, like with the Kennedy assassination, here we are 50 years later, and it's still, well, lone gunman killed the president, and he was a communist, and whatever we hear first seems to stick in our craw.
Sure. Or in our memory. Yeah. So your point is that you think that the California oil spill. I didn't know that there was an oil spill up in the Mackinac Straits from.
No, there wasn't a spill. There's two anchor strikes.
But the pipeline's held.
That's correct.
Well, that's sort of good news, but just the fact that we've got pipelines running through the Great Lakes, the largest freshwater body of fresh water on Earth is.
And something I learned about that location of that pipeline is that, and I didn't know before, was that the water flows through from Lake Michigan underneath the Mackinac Bridge to Lake Huron typically. Right. But when levels are different, it can actually flow back the other way.
Correct.
And so that pipeline was laid on the bottom, just like the one that in California is laid on the bottom, and eventually they realized that the water washing back and forth was scouring underneath it, creating gaps in the bottom, or the support from the bottom. So they put in anchors, little bridges that held up and supported the span in the middle of the straits there. Yeah. And so my concern is, and I'd like to say to everybody that's listening, electric is coming, and we're fighting against oil companies whose costs get passed on to the consumers.
Yeah,
These
absolutely.
Costs for the cleanup.
I don't understand why they didn't just build that pipeline as something that hangs off the bottom of the Mackinac Bridge or the side of the Mackinac Bridge.
Well, I did too. I wondered the same thing. But
that way, if there was any kind of leak, you'd know it immediately.
No, yeah, that's right. Well, anyway, I just want everybody to know electric is coming. We have to push for it.
There you go. I'm with you, Tom. Tom, thank you very much for the call. Thanks for watching us in Marquette on Facebook Live. I do appreciate it. We will be right back. It's 10 minutes before the hour. Stick around. Share the Thom Hartmann Program with your friends. We're available on SiriusXM, Free Speech TV, Pacifica, commercial stations nationwide, YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, on the Thom Hartmann app, and you can even tell your smart speaker to listen to the Thom Hartmann Program. Hey, we've got a new video up over at ThomHartmann.com about Big Mail-In. You heard about this? Now, I'm not talking about the George Bernard Shaw play that got made into the movie My Fair Lady and all that kind of stuff. No, this is a PR firm in France. And, when you hear from Americans that, we could never put Donald Trump in jail because only third world countries do that. France is not only not a third world country, they're our oldest ally. And they just convicted their former president for the second time of fraud and corruption around the way he was running his campaigns. Nicolas Sarkozy. They just convicted him a second time. Now, he's appealing both of them. He's, walking around with an ankle bracelet. But, you know, I've got all the details on this video over at thomhartmann.com. You can check it out. But, you know, again, next time somebody says, we can't put Trump in jail, tell them, hey, France did. Back, it's Anything Goes Friday here on the Thom Hartmann Program. And Joel in Portland. Hey, Joel, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom. You know, there's actually something I've been thinking about for about the past week or so. I had a conversation with a friend about cryptocurrency, and I asked the question of, well, what's it based on? If it's he was kind of posing it as a parallel economic system. Mm-hmm. But then it got me thinking, what's the dollar based on? You know, it used to be based on gold. And what I've always heard, this is armchair economist, you know, total layperson here speaking. What I've always heard is it's based on consumer confidence. And the more I thought about it, it made me think, actually, no, it's based on labor. And specifically, most of the profits could be considered stolen labor. And I just wanted to see what your take on this is. And maybe next time you talk to, I think it's Dr. Richard Wolff. Yeah. You could pose this question to him. I didn't seem to.
That's a great question, Joel. My understanding is that the dollar is basically based on what's referred to as the full faith and credit of the United States. In other words, based on kind of the asset base of our nation, based on our you know, and the government's ability to mobilize that, and regulated by the Federal Reserve, but. And what might be an alternative to that is a good question. In terms of you know, Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies, they seem, from where I'm sitting, to be based on energy consumption.
That's what I thought.
And as computers get more and more efficient at using energy to mine Bitcoin by running mathematical, you know, guesses, basically, then Bitcoin you would think, over time become less valuable, or, you know, represent a smaller energy load. But in fact, it's gotten more valuable, which tells me that Bitcoin, we're in a South Sea tulip or South Sea bubble, or the Dutch tulip bubble, the kind of thing where you've got a commodity, in this case Bitcoin, that is being priced way out of proportion to its actual value. But
that's kind of what I felt too.
Yeah. But these are good questions for Richard Wolff. I think Sean is writing them down right now. So
one quick aside to this is one way to think about this is too, like, what happened to the value of the dollar? And you know what? I actually don't know. I'm just totally speculating here. I feel like the value of the dollar cratered during the pandemic when there was a labor stoppage.
No, I think the dollar actually got stronger.
It did get stronger. Okay, so maybe there proves my point.
But it didn't get stronger by a substantial amount. I mean, and we define strong as relative to other currencies, right? You know, relative to the yen, relative to the euro, relative to the ruble or the yuan. But it's all relative. So anyway, yeah. Thank you very much. I got to run here, Joel. Thank you, Tom in Temecula. Tom, we have less than a minute. You got a quick one?
Well, try. Everybody in Congress was witness to the insurrection, and they should all be put on record, get a witness statement under the penalty of perjury. And those who didn't want to certify the election should have to do it on a public forum, either at least recorded. And then we get on oath, get them under oath saying that they believe that the election was legitimate or not, and then use that against them and against Trump in their efforts to continue to push the big lie.
I like that idea. By the way, I just discovered I have a minute and a half. I thought I had only a half a minute. Tom, I'm with you. I'm 100% with you. Thank you very much. I appreciate the call. MJ in Seattle. Hey, MJ, what's up?
Hey, I'm
glad to
talk to you today. I really enjoyed Monday when you talked about the goddess and the alphabet. And I wanted to turn you on to Ian McGilchrist, IAIN, and it's MCGIL and then Christ.
Okay.
And he is a scientist who, in his previous career, was teaching poetry at Oxford. And he just got really tired of taking art out of art because your brain on the right side, this is the master, and we've thought of it as a side issue. So getting your left and right brain in balance is going to save the world if we can do it.
Yeah, and that's what a lot of bilateral therapies are based on. I wrote a book about that called Walking Your Blues Away. I think you'd find it fascinating. MJ, thank you. Ian, say it again? McGilchrist. Okay, MJ's been muted. Hey, special thanks to Louise Hartman, Sean Taylor, Nate Atwell, Jamie Holly, Joyce the Hammer, Nance, Nigel Peacock, Student Advocate, Patrick Hoyt, Geraldine Halbert, Ron Hartenbaum, Chase Spross, and the folks who run our chat room over on YouTube, Nicholas Miller, Pat Sweeney, Jabberwocky, Jay LeBlanc, Connor Arroyo, and Carta Verde. Thank you to you all. And thank you for listening and watching our program. Get out there, get active, tag You're It. Have a great weekend. We'll see you on Monday. Take care.
You've been listening to Thom Hartmann. For audio and video archives, visit thomhartmann.com.
These companies support the Thom Hartmann Program. They are HelloFresh, the #1 meal kit delivery service. More info at HelloFresh.com, code TOM. CB Distillery, CBD for sleep and pain relief. More info is available at cbdistillery.com, code TOM. Ground News, a well-rounded perspective for news readers. More info at ground.news/Tom. Angie, for any project on your to-do list. More info at Angie.com. Dinovite, a whole food supplement for your pet's immune system. More info at Dinovite.com. And ExpressVPN, the VPN that just works. More information at expressvpn.com/Tom.
We say fight back!